On hot summer nights, the air in small towns tends to hang heavy, still, and oddly restless, as if something unseen lingers just outside the corner of your vision. In late July, when the humidity wrapped itself around everything like a suffocating blanket, a group of friends learned that some nights should never be ignored, no matter how ordinary they seem at first glance. It started with Jacob, a 23-year-old who had just moved back to his hometown after college. He was restless, stuck in that awkward limbo where friends had scattered and the world seemed too big but too quiet at the same time. That Friday night, he texted Emily, his childhood friend, asking if she wanted to hang out. She agreed, and soon enough, she picked him up in her old Jeep, which rattled with every bump in the road. Emily had always been the adventurous one, the type who hated staying in. She had a few beers stashed in a cooler in the back seat, already planning for a long night of driving around the countryside. "Where to?" Jacob asked as he tossed his backpack into the back and climbed in. Emily grinned and shrugged. "Somewhere the night takes us. Just not home." The first couple of hours were harmless. Driving along back roads, windows rolled down, the warm air rushing in. They sang along to old songs, swapped stories about people they once knew, and laughed like kids again. It wasn't until after 11 p.m. that Emily suggested heading toward the outskirts of town, to the places they used to dare each other to go when they were teenagers. "You remember Miller's Woods?" she asked, her voice lowering slightly as if saying the name itself was taboo. Jacob shifted uncomfortably. "The one where people used to say, 'A kid went missing'?" Emily nodded. "Yeah. You ever notice no one actually goes there anymore? Like, even adults avoid it." The woods weren't far, 10 minutes from town, hidden along a nearly invisible dirt path. When they were 15, their group of friends used to talk about sneaking in, but they never got past the edge. Rumors had clung to that place for decades. Some said a boy vanished there in the 1980s and was never found. Others claimed they saw lights flickering deep inside at night, though there was no electricity anywhere nearby. Jacob wanted to brush it off, but curiosity had a way of eating at him. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe the heat, maybe nostalgia, but he agreed when Emily pulled the Jeep off the main road and onto a narrow dirt track swallowed by weeds. The trees closed in on both sides, their branches arching over the path like a tunnel. Emily turned off the radio, and the silence pressed against them. It wasn't the normal quiet of countryside nights filled with crickets and frogs. It was emptier, more unnatural. By the time they reached a small clearing big enough to park, both of them felt the strange weight of the place. The moon was nearly full, casting pale light over the tall grass. The trees swayed slightly, though the air was still. Jacob noticed it first, how the forest around them didn't seem alive. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, no croaking frogs. "You feel that?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, her voice quieter than before. "Yeah, it's too quiet." Still, she grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and hopped out. Jacob followed reluctantly. The crunch of gravel under their shoes sounded too loud in the silence. They walked only a few yards into the woods before they noticed something strange. An old trail, barely visible, leading deeper into the trees. The dirt was packed, but the weeds seemed bent away, as though people still walked there occasionally. Jacob hesitated. "I don't like this," Emily smirked, though her voice trembled slightly. "You never liked this stuff. Come on, we'll just go a little bit." They followed the path. The trees grew thicker, the canopy blotting out the moonlight. Their flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing gnarled roots and patches of moss. It should have been sweltering under all that foliage, but instead the air grew cooler, almost damp. Jacob shivered despite the heat clinging to his shirt. After about 10 minutes, they came across something neither of them expected, a small dilapidated shack tucked between the trees. Its wooden boards sagged, the roof partially collapsed. It looked abandoned for decades, yet there were faint signs that someone had been there. A rusted lantern leaned against the door frame. The dirt outside was disturbed, as though something had been dragged. Emily whispered, "Holy shit. No one ever told us there was a house out here." Jacob swallowed hard. "Let's go back." Seriously. But Emily was already edging closer. The door hung slightly ajar. She reached out and pushed it open with one hand, the wood groaning. The smell hit them immediately. damp, rot, and something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. Inside, the shack was nearly empty. Broken furniture lay in piles, and molds spread along the walls. But in the corner sat something that didn't belong, an old metal chair, upright, with leather straps attached to the arms. Emily's flashlight shook slightly as she raised it. That looks like someone tied people here. Jacob's stomach turned. He tugged on her arm. I'm not kidding. Let's get the hell out. She didn't argue this time. They both backed out quickly, stumbling over roots as they hurried back toward the clearing. But halfway down the trail, Emily froze. Did you hear that? She whispered. Jacob stopped, listening. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, from deeper in the woods, a dragging sound, slow, deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. Neither of them moved. Emily's breathing quickened. The sound came again, closer this time. They ran. Branches whipped against their arms and faces as they sprinted toward the clearing, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The dragging sound grew louder, and Jacob swore he heard another noise mixed in, low, guttural breathing. When they burst into the clearing, Jacob's chest burned from the effort. They dove into the Jeep, slamming the doors shut. Emily fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling. Come on, come on, Jacob muttered, glancing out the window toward the trail. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a figure, tall and thin, stepping just past the tree line. But when Emily finally turned the ignition and the headlights flared, there was nothing there. They sped out of the woods, dust and gravel flying behind them. Neither spoke until they reached the safety of the main road. Even then, the silence lingered heavy. Emily finally broke it. What the hell was that? Jacob shook his head, still staring out the window. I don't know, and I don't ever want to. They both swore not to go back, not to talk about it. But in the days that followed, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. At night, lying in bed, he swore he heard faint, dragging sounds outside his window. He told himself it was just his imagination, fueled by fear and lack of sleep. Until one night around 3 a.m., he woke to a sound that froze him in place, the unmistakable groan of wood, like a door being pushed open slowly. His front door. Jabe didn't move, didn't breathe, straining to hear. The silence stretched, but then came that dragging sound, this time inside the house. He lay paralyzed as it moved closer, across the living room floor, down the hallway. His bedroom door creaked. He could see the faint outline of it opening wider in the moonlight, and in that sliver of light he saw it, a tall, thin silhouette, unmoving, watching. He shut his eyes, praying it was a dream, too afraid to open them again. When he finally did, the room was empty, the door still slightly open, the silence heavier than ever. He never told Emily, never told anyone. But every summer night since, when the air grows still and the world feels too quiet, Jacob lies awake listening, waiting for the sound of dragging to return. Story the end. The summer nights in the Midwest have a way of settling into your memory. They're warm, sticky, and alive with the constant buzz of insects in the grass. Even after the sun goes down, the air feels heavy and the woods seem to hum with an energy you can't quite place. That night started like so many others, nothing out of the ordinary. Just 4 friends on break from college, looking for something to do in a small town that didn't offer much beyond fields, woods, and the occasional bonfire by the lake. It was me, my best friend Tyler, his girlfriend Hannah, and our buddy Mark. We'd spent most of the day swimming in a small, half-forgotten quarry just outside of town, the kind of place teenagers always went to when they didn't have anywhere else. By the time evening came, we weren't ready to go home yet. It was summer. Nobody wanted to waste a night sitting in their room while the air felt so charged with possibility. Someone, I think it was Mark, suggested driving out toward the state park, not the main part with campsites and picnic tables, but farther, to the older access road where barely anyone went anymore. We piled into Tyler's beat-up Ford Explorer, windows down, music low, the smell of lake water still on our skin. The park road was dark, the pavement cracked, and after a few turns it became gravel. Our headlights bounced off trees leaning over the narrow path, making it feel like we were being swallowed up by the forest. Tyler killed the radio after a while, the night too still and too quiet to drown out. Even Hannah, usually talkative, went silent, leaning against the window, staring out into the shifting blur of leaves. We stopped when the road dead-ended into a rotting wooden barrier meant to keep cars out of the trails. The four of us got out, and immediately the night pressed in. Thick, hot air and the shrill cries of crickets all around. The only light came from the explorer's headlights until Tyler flicked them off, leaving us with just a dim glow from the moon slipping between the clouds. We had no plan, really. Just walk. Maybe explore. The gravel crunched under our shoes as we passed the barrier and followed the trail into the woods. It didn't take long for the trees to close in around us. The trail was wide enough, but the underbrush was dense, and the shadows seemed to ripple with every small movement. We joked a little at first, teasing Hannah when she mentioned how creepy it was, but soon we all felt it. That sense you get when the night is too quiet, like the world is holding its breath. About a mile in, the trail split. To the right, it climbed toward a ridge, and to the left, it dipped down into darker woods. Mark wanted to head left. Tyler argued for the ridge. After a minute of bickering, Hannah said she didn't want to go much farther at all. Something about the air, she said. It smelled wrong, like copper and dirt. I hadn't noticed it until she said something, but she was right. It was faint, but there, a metallic tang that didn't belong. We compromised by going just a little farther down the left path. We figured we'd walk for 10 minutes, then turn back. The deeper we went, the heavier the smell got. Not just metallic anymore, but something sour mixed in, like meat left out too long. The crickets seemed quieter too, their endless chorus fading into patches of silence. We reached a small clearing where the trail widened out as though people had once camped there. An old fire ring sat in the center, blackened stones half sunk into the earth. Around the edges of the clearing, the trees leaned in tightly, their branches knitted overhead so only a sliver of sky showed through. None of us spoke for a long moment. It felt wrong to even be there, like we'd stumbled into someplace we weren't meant to find. Mark broke the silence. "Probably just some hunters use this spot," he said, kicking at one of the stones. "That smell? Probably a deer carcass nearby." "Then where's the noise?" Hannah asked quietly. "If something's dead, there should be coyotes, bugs, something." She was right again. The quiet was unnatural. Even the breeze seemed to die when we stepped into that clearing. Tyler laughed a little, trying to play it off, but his voice sounded strained. "You're just freaking yourself out. Come on, let's head back." We all agreed too quickly, eager to leave. But as we turned back toward the trail, I froze. Someone was standing at the far edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was just a tree stump or shadow, but then it moved. A tall figure, thin, almost spindly, stood half hidden by the trees. I couldn't make out details, only that it was pale, and it seemed to be watching us. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. Everyone turned, and Hannah gasped, grabbing Tyler's arm. The figure didn't move closer, didn't make a sound, just stood there, head tilted slightly like it was curious. "Probably just some hiker," Mark said, though his voice shook. "Hey, you good, man?" he called out. No answer. The figure didn't even shift. "Let's go," Hannah urged, tugging at Tyler's sleeve. We started back toward the trail, keeping our eyes on that thing. The moment we stepped past the edge of the clearing, I swear it leaned forward, like it wanted to follow. We picked up our pace, gravel crunching under our shoes until we were nearly jogging. The trail felt longer on the way back, every shadow moving, every sound amplified. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but when I glanced back, the trail was empty. By the time we reached the car, we were breathless and sweating, though the night wasn't that hot anymore. Tyler fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, before finally getting the engine to roar to life. We piled in, slamming the doors, locking them automatically. As the headlights lit up the barrier, my stomach dropped. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, just beyond the wood. It wasn't pale anymore. The light caught its face, or what should have been a face. It was wrong, stretched too long, with deep hollows where the eyes should be. Its mouth, if that's what it was, seemed too wide, too sharp. Tyler swore loudly and slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel. We tore back down the narrow road, the trees whipping past, branches scraping the sides of the car. No one spoke until we hit pavement again, and even then it was only ragged breaths, curses, disbelief. "What the hell was that?" Hannah finally whispered. No one had an answer. We didn't talk much the rest of the night. Tyler dropped us each off at home, making sure not to leave anyone alone outside too long. When I lay in bed later, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing standing there, head tilted, as if memorizing us. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, just one of those strange summer nights that haunts your memory, something to tell years later with a laugh, though never quite comfortable. But it wasn't. Over the next week, each of us noticed things, small, strange things. Hannah said she saw someone watching from the tree line near her backyard, but when Tyler went to check, there was nothing. Mark swore he heard footsteps outside his window at night. For me, it was dreams, vivid, too real. Always the same, standing in that clearing, unable to move, while something leaned out from the trees, closer and closer, until I could smell that copper tang in its breath. The worst came one night when I woke to scratching at my bedroom window. I live on the second floor. No tree branches close enough to reach. The sound was deliberate, slow, like fingernails dragging across the glass. I didn't look. I couldn't. I lay frozen until dawn when the sound finally stopped. The four of us met once more after that in daylight, sitting in the corner booth of a diner. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all terrified. Tyler said we should forget it, never go back. Hannah wanted to tell someone, but who would believe us? Mark barely spoke at all, just stirred his coffee and stared at the table. We never went back to that park. None of us even drove near it again. But sometimes on summer nights, when the air feels heavy and the woods seem too quiet, I think about that clearing. I think about the figure watching us, how it didn't chase us, didn't try to stop us. It just let us see it, like it wanted us to know it was there, to carry it with us. And I still hear scratching at my window sometimes, though I never look. Story the end. It was the kind of summer night that made the air heavy and sticky, the kind that felt like you were walking through warm syrup. The cicadas were buzzing, frogs croaking along the creek, and every porch in the small town seemed to glow with a faint yellow light as people sat outside to catch what little breeze moved through the thick air. I was 19 that summer, home from college, and like every other restless kid in town, I spent most evenings looking for something to do that would keep me away from the silence of my room. That night, my friend Travis convinced me and a couple of others to drive out past the edge of town, out to the back roads that wrapped around the farmlands and woods. He had this old Chevy pickup, the kind that rattled and groaned whenever you pushed it past 50, but it was sturdy and familiar. We threw a cooler of sodas and some leftover barbecue into the back and decided to find a spot along the river to hang out. It was me, Travis, his girlfriend Megan, and my buddy Caleb. We weren't the type to throw wild parties, but we liked being out under the stars with nowhere to be. The river spot was about 30 minutes outside town, just off an unmarked dirt road that led down to an abandoned fishing access. Hardly anyone went there anymore, which made it perfect. We got there just before the last bit of twilight faded, the river black and slow-moving under the half moon. The air smelled like wet earth and honeysuckle, and fireflies flickered across the grass. We spread out a blanket, lit a couple citronella candles, and played some music from Travis's phone. It felt like every other summer night we'd had before, that lazy calm that makes you think nothing in the world could touch you. But something did. It started with the sound. At first, I thought it was just the usual woods noises, the creak of branches, the occasional rustle of leaves, but this was different, a steady crunch like footsteps moving just out of sight in the tree line across the clearing. Caleb heard it first, pausing mid-sentence and cocking his head. "You hear that?" he asked. We all went quiet. Sure enough, there it was again. Crunch, crunch. Not fast, not panicked, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot on dry leaves. Megan frowned, pulling her knees closer. Probably a deer. "Deer don't walk like that," Caleb muttered. He was from a family of hunters, and he knew the woods better than anyone. We stared into the shadows, trying to pierce the blackness between the trees. The candles flickered, the music seemed suddenly too loud, and Travis reached over to lower it. The footsteps stopped. For a few minutes, nothing happened. We relaxed, laughed it off, and tried to go back to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes. Then Megan gasped. She pointed toward the woods, her hand trembling. "There. Did you see that?" We all looked. At first, I didn't notice anything, but then I saw it too. Between the trees, maybe 30 feet back, a pale shape moved. Not an animal, not a trick of the moonlight. It looked like a person, tall and thin, standing perfectly still. "Hey!" Travis shouted, his voice cracking a little. "Who's out there?" No answer. The figure didn't move. We all stood up, adrenaline kicking in. Caleb pulled a flashlight from the truck and clicked it on, the beam cutting across the clearing. When it landed on the figure, my stomach dropped. It was a man, or something shaped like a man, dressed in clothes that looked decades old. His shirt was white but stained and torn, hanging loose from his bony frame. His face, I don't even know how to describe it. It was pale, almost gray, with hollow eyes that seemed to sink too deep into his skull. He didn't blink, didn't shift, just stood there like he'd been waiting. "What the hell?" Travis muttered. Caleb raised the flashlight higher, but the man stepped back into the trees, vanishing without a sound. That should have been our cue to leave. Any rational group would have packed up and gotten the hell out, but we were teenagers, stupid, and trying to act braver than we were. We argued about it. Megan wanted to leave, Caleb wanted to chase after him, and Travis insisted it was just some weirdo messing with us. Against my better judgment, we stayed. An hour passed, and nothing else happened. The cicadas droned on, the river gurgled softly, and we tried to convince ourselves it was just some local drunk or maybe even a squatter living in the woods. By midnight, Megan had calmed down, and we were sitting around joking again. Then we heard it. This time, the sound came from behind us, up the dirt road we'd driven in on. Slow, dragging footsteps, closer than before. We spun around, and my blood ran cold. He was standing in the middle of the road. The same man, closer now, illuminated by the moonlight. His posture was wrong, too stiff, too unnatural. His head tilted to one side like he was studying us. And even though we were a good 40 feet away, I swear I could hear him breathing, this wet, rasping sound that didn't match the still night air. Megan screamed. Travis cursed and grabbed his keys, yelling at us to get in the truck. We didn't argue this time. We grabbed what we could and piled in, slamming the doors. Travis started the engine and the headlights washed over the man. He was gone. Not walked away, not turned back into the woods. Gone. 1 second he was there, the next the road was empty. Travis floored it, the truck bouncing hard as we tore back up the dirt path. My hands shook as I gripped the seat, heart hammering in my chest. None of us said a word until we hit the paved road, the yellow lines rushing past under the headlights. We drove straight back into town, parked at the diner, and sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Megan was crying. Caleb kept muttering, "I saw him. I swear I saw him." And Travis lit one cigarette after another, even though he'd quit months before. I don't know what we saw that night. A ghost? A man? Something else? All I know is it wasn't natural. The way he moved, the way he disappeared, it didn't make sense. That summer ended and we never went back to that river spot again. We didn't talk about it much either. But sometimes when the nights are hot and still and the cicadas buzz so loud it feels like the whole world is humming, I think about that pale figure in the woods, about how he stood there watching us, silent and patient, like he knew we'd come. And I wonder if he's still out there waiting for the next group of kids who think the night is theirs to waste. Story, the end. It was the middle of July when the heat clung to everything like a second skin. The air was heavy, thick, and suffocating, the kind of night when even the slightest breeze would have felt like a blessing. The cicadas screamed from the trees, their endless droning almost like static in the background, and the smell of cut grass still hung faintly in the air after the sun had gone down. Small-town summers had their charm, but they also carried a certain weight. An emptiness that settled in once the streets went quiet and the last porch lights flicked off. That night I was with my friends, Ben and Tyler. We were 17, restless, and too wired from the day to even think about sleep. Hanging out on Ben's back porch had turned into wandering the neighborhood, cutting through yards and laughing too loudly for the hour. It was the kind of mischief that seemed harmless at the time, the thrill of being out late when everyone else was asleep, making the world feel like it belonged only to us. Tyler suggested we walk down to the old river road, a stretch of cracked pavement that ran parallel to the woods. It wasn't a road anyone used anymore. Years back, it had been closed off when flooding washed away part of the bridge, leaving it useless except for kids daring each other to sneak out there at night. We all knew stories about it, about strange lights seen hovering along the tree line, about voices carrying across the water when no one was around. Parents brushed it off as urban legend, but it was enough to make the place feel forbidden, dangerous in a way that pulled us toward it. Ben didn't need much convincing. His parents were asleep, and he lived closest to the trail that led there. We grabbed a couple of flashlights and slipped away, the beam of mine bouncing along the cracked sidewalk as we made our way toward the woods. The second we stepped under the tree canopy, the air felt different. Cooler, yes, but heavier, like something was watching, pressing down from all sides. The cicadas quieted, replaced by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of unseen animals in the underbrush. Tyler was the first to joke about it, trying to shake off the nerves with a laugh, but his voice carried strangely in the dark, bouncing back at us like an echo, even though there weren't any walls to catch the sound. It was nearly midnight when we reached the broken road. The asphalt was buckled and cracked, weeds growing up through the splits. In the distance, the remains of the bridge jutted out like skeletal bones, ending abruptly where it had collapsed years before. The river glistened faintly under the moonlight, black and endless. We sat on the guardrail, talking in low voices, daring each other to walk farther down into the shadows where the trees crowded over the road. It wasn't long before Tyler claimed he saw something moving, just beyond the reach of the flashlight beams. At first, I thought he was just messing with us, but then I caught it too. A flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't quite fit with the others. It was too tall to be a deer, too narrow to be a person, and it moved in a way that didn't look natural, jerky, like something trying too hard to mimic walking. Ben aimed his flashlight into the trees, the beam cutting through the darkness, but whatever it was had slipped away. The woods looked normal again, though the silence had deepened. Probably just a raccoon, Ben muttered, but his voice wasn't steady. We should have gone home then, but we didn't. Something about being there, about feeling that strange charge in the air, made us dig in our heels. Tyler threw a rock toward the trees, and the sharp crack when it landed seemed to echo too long, bouncing back at us in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, from somewhere just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it might be someone messing with us, maybe older kids trying to scare us off. But the sound wasn't right. The steps dragged, uneven, like someone half limping, half stomping. We froze, listening. My flashlight shook slightly in my hand, the beam trembling across the asphalt. "Hello?" Tyler called out, though his voice wavered. "Who's there?" No answer, just those dragging footsteps, closer now. Ben cursed under his breath and swept the flashlight across the woods again, and that's when I saw it. Between the trees, pale and still, stood a figure. It was tall, too tall, the head nearly brushing the lowest branches. Its arms hung strangely long at its sides, and even from that distance I could see that its face wasn't right. It didn't look human. Not really. The second the light hit it, the figure melted back into the trees, disappearing so fast it was like it hadn't been there at all. But the footsteps didn't stop. That broke something in us. We bolted, running down the cracked asphalt, breath tearing in our throats. The night swallowed us, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we sprinted toward the trail that would lead back to Ben's neighborhood. But no matter how fast we ran, the sound of those dragging footsteps stayed close behind, steady and relentless. We didn't stop until we broke through the tree line and stumbled back into the familiar glow of the streetlights. Only then did the sound fade, cut off like it had never been there. We stood there, gasping for breath, eyes wide and wild. None of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Ben said, "We don't tell anyone about this. They'll think we're making it up." We all agreed, though none of us could shake the feeling that something had followed us back. For weeks after, I'd wake in the middle of the night, certain I heard those dragging steps outside my window. Tyler swore he saw a pale shape at the edge of his yard one night, gone when he blinked. Ben started sleeping with his light on, though he never admitted why. Summer dragged on, hot and suffocating, but the nights felt colder, emptier. We didn't go back to the river road, not once. But sometimes when the cicadas fell silent all at once, or when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, I knew it was still out there, and deep down I feared it hadn't just stayed by the river. I still don't walk outside at night alone. Not in the summer. Not ever. Story the end. It was one of those heavy summer nights where the heat seemed to press against your skin like a wet blanket. The air was still, thick, and buzzing with the constant drone of cicadas hidden somewhere in the trees. The small town of Fairgrove, nestled quietly in rural Indiana, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where porch lights stayed on more out of habit than necessity, and where nothing ever really happened. At least, nothing anyone could put into words. But that summer of 2012 had changed everything for me. I had been home from college for about 2 weeks. My parents lived just outside of town, a couple of miles down a 2-lane road lined with cornfields on either side. On nights like that one, with the moon swollen and bright above the stalks, the fields looked endless, black waves rolling toward the horizon. My closest neighbor was a good quarter-mile away, and the road saw maybe 3 cars after dark on a busy night. I loved the quiet as a kid, but coming home after living in a city made it feel a little too isolated. It was a Friday, and a few of my friends from high school had planned to meet up down at the quarry to drink, swim, and try to relive the kind of summer nights we had before everyone scattered to different colleges and jobs. I had driven my dad's old Ford, windows down, music humming low on the radio, the air warm against my arm as I rested it on the door. By the time I got to the quarry, there were maybe 10 of us already there. Beer cans cracked open, laughter bouncing across the water, someone's Bluetooth speaker rattling out country music that didn't quite fit the eerie stillness of the place. The quarry was surrounded by a thick patch of woods, but at night all you could see was blackness pressing against the water's edge. The surface of the water looked almost oily in the dark, reflecting the moon in broken shards every time someone jumped in. I remember standing there, holding a beer, feeling like I should be enjoying myself, but the night carried a strange weight. It was around midnight when I decided to head out. A couple of others were planning to camp near the water, but I had no intention of staying there. I wasn't drunk, maybe a little buzzed, but I was fine to drive. As I climbed into the truck and started the engine, I noticed how quickly the voices and laughter disappeared into the trees behind me. Once I pulled onto the road, it was just me, the moonlit cornfields, and the steady thrum of the engine. There was a stretch of road on the way home that always made me uneasy, even as a kid. About a mile past the old Miller barn, the cornfields narrowed in closer, and there weren't any streetlights for nearly 2 miles. The blackness between the stalks always felt alive, like something could be watching you from just beyond the first row of corn. I tried not to think about it as I passed, my headlights cutting a narrow path through the darkness. That was when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a deer, something pale at the edge of my high beams. But as I slowed the truck, I realized it was a man. He stood on the side of the road, right where the gravel shoulder dipped into the corn. He was tall, rail-thin, and completely still. I caught a glimpse of what looked like a white t-shirt and dark pants, but it was his face, or rather the lack of expression, that made my stomach twist. He just stared straight ahead, not at me, not at the road, just forward. I eased my foot off the gas, not wanting to stop, but too rattled to blow past him. The man didn't move, didn't even seem to notice me. For a second, I thought maybe he was drunk or high, or someone who'd gotten lost walking home from the quarry. But something in me screamed not to stop, not to roll down the window, not to say anything at all. I pressed down on the gas again, the truck grumbling forward, and as the beams of light shifted off him, I caught one last detail that made my skin crawl. His head turned, slowly, following the truck as I passed. By the time I made it home, my chest was tight, hands damp on the wheel. I told myself it was nothing, just some guy who'd had too much to drink. But that night, I couldn't shake the image of him, standing stiff as a scarecrow, eyes following me into the dark. The next morning, I woke up groggy, the air still heavy with humidity. My mom mentioned at breakfast that she'd heard sirens late in the night, maybe around 3 a.m., though she didn't know where they were headed. Fairgrove didn't get much excitement, so sirens always traveled farther on the summer air, echoing through the fields. That day passed slow, and by evening I was restless again. I ended up driving into town for a soda and some chips, just to get out of the house. On my way back around dusk, I passed the same stretch of road where I'd seen the man. I slowed down without meaning to, my eyes scanning the corn. The stalks shifted faintly in the breeze, but no one was there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and kept driving. That night, though, I woke to a sound outside my window. It was faint at first, like someone dragging their hand along the siding of the house. I lay there, the ceiling fan clicking above me, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe a tree branch. But then it came again, slower this time, deliberate. A long scrape, then silence. I sat up, heart hammering, and strained to listen. The cicadas had gone quiet, leaving the night oddly hollow. I glanced at the clock. 2:37 a.m. Every muscle in me told me not to look out the window, but I couldn't help it. I slid carefully out of bed, moved to the blinds, and tilted one slat just enough to peek outside. The yard was lit by moonlight, the grass pale and silver. Nothing moved. My truck sat in the driveway, the outline of the barn dark against the horizon. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then my eyes shifted toward the edge of the cornfield. He was standing there. The same man, the same white t-shirt catching faint light. His figure was almost swallowed by the stalks, but he was close enough that I could see his head tilted upward, looking directly at my window. I stumbled back, chest tight, blinds snapping shut with a rattle. My first instinct was to wake my dad, but by the time I mustered the nerve to go to his room, the scraping noise had stopped. When my dad checked the yard with his flashlight, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken stalks, no sign anyone had been there. The next few nights blurred together in a haze of anxiety. Every creak of the house made me tense. Every shadow across the lawn made me hesitate. I started avoiding that stretch of road altogether, even though it meant driving an extra 5 miles to get anywhere. I didn't tell my friends about it. How could I explain? It sounded crazy, like I was seeing things. But then, about a week later, it escalated. It was another humid night, the kind where the air felt thick enough to drink. I'd been tossing and turning for hours when the dogs outside began to bark. We had 2 mutts that usually slept in the barn, and they weren't the kind to bark at nothing. Their howls were sharp, frantic. I sat up in bed, dread already spreading through me. Then came the noise again, the scraping against the siding, but louder this time, more insistent, like nails dragging deliberately across the wood. I forced myself to look, heart thudding so hard it hurt. I peeled back the blinds and my breath caught. He was closer, standing in the yard now, just beyond the porch. His face was clearer under the moonlight, pale and gaunt, his features slack but wrong somehow, as if they'd been blurred, like a smudge on a photograph. His body swayed slightly, not with the breeze, but in a slow, deliberate motion. I didn't remember running to my parents' room, but suddenly I was there, shouting, begging them to come look. By the time my dad stormed onto the porch with his shotgun, the yard was empty again. The dogs were still barking, but there was nothing there. The sheriff came out the next day after my mom insisted, though it was clear he thought it was some kind of prank. He found nothing, no footprints, no evidence of anyone lurking around. But I knew what I'd seen. I couldn't have imagined the way his head tilted, the way his eyes seemed fixed on me, hollow and unblinking. That summer night was the beginning of something I still can't explain. He came back again and again, sometimes just at the edge of the corn, sometimes closer, always watching, never speaking, never moving unless I wasn't looking. The heat, the cicadas, the glow of the moon, they all became tied to that presence. And the worst part? By the end of that summer, I realized he wasn't just watching me from outside anymore. Some nights, I'd wake to the sound of breathing inside my room. Story the end. It was the kind of night that should have been calm and beautiful, the kind people look forward to in summer. The air was heavy with heat, even after the sun had gone down, and the cicadas outside droned in an endless chorus. I had just gotten back from a barbecue at my friend's house and was too wired to sleep, though the hour was pushing past midnight. I lived alone at the time in a small rental house just outside of town, a quiet place tucked back in the trees with a gravel driveway that curved off the main road. It wasn't anything special, just 2 bedrooms, a porch that needed repairs, and a backyard that seemed to bleed into the woods. I'd lived there for about 6 months, And while I loved the privacy, there were times when the isolation got under my skin. That night was one of those times. I decided to sit out on the porch with a cold beer, letting the summer night hum around me. The stars were out, scattered across the sky, and the trees rustled every so often in a hot breeze. I could hear the occasional distant car passing on the highway miles away, muffled by the thick air. What I couldn't shake was the sense that the woods seemed unusually alive, louder than normal, as if something was moving deeper inside them. I told myself it was deer or raccoons. Still, every time I looked past the tree line, I had the uncomfortable feeling of eyes watching me from the dark. The first strange thing happened when I went inside to grab another beer. My back door, which I had locked earlier, was standing wide open. I froze in the kitchen, the bottle sweating in my hand, and just stared at it. My stomach dropped. I knew I had locked it. I remembered hearing the deadbolt click. I stood there for what felt like minutes, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe I hadn't shut it all the way, maybe the wind had blown it open, but the night air outside was completely still, and the door had been firmly shut. My mind drifted immediately to the thought of someone being inside the house. I grabbed the heaviest thing in reach, a cast iron pan, and went through each room, flicking on lights and checking closets, corners, under the bed. Everything was empty, nothing out of place. Just me in that hot, still house. I locked the door again, checking it twice this time, and told myself I was being paranoid. But I couldn't settle down. I turned the TV on in the living room, more for background noise than anything else, and sat on the couch. Around 1 a.m, just when I was starting to relax, I heard it. The crunch of footsteps on gravel outside. My driveway was long enough that I could easily tell when a car pulled in or when someone was walking. The sound was unmistakable. Slow, steady steps making their way up toward the house. My heart jumped into my throat. I muted the TV and sat frozen, listening. The steps came closer until they seemed to stop right in front of the porch. I didn't turn on the porch light right away. I just sat there, holding my breath, straining my ears. Nothing. Just the cicadas screaming in the background. Finally, I worked up the courage to flip on the porch light. But when I looked out the window, the porch was empty. The gravel drive was empty. Nobody there. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the yard and the edge of the woods. Still nothing. The night seemed to swallow up the light the further out I looked, shadows stretching everywhere. I felt the skin prickle on the back of my neck. The sound had been so clear. I couldn't have imagined it. But there was nobody. I went back inside and locked the door again, double-checking the latch. My nerves were on fire. I didn't know whether to call the cops, but what would I even say? I heard footsteps, but didn't see anyone. They'd chalk it up to nerves or the heat messing with me. I decided to wait it out. I turned the TV back on, trying to convince myself it had been some animal wandering across the gravel. I even laughed a little under my breath, telling myself I'd sound crazy if I explained it to anyone. Still, I couldn't shake that crawling feeling under my skin. Not long after, maybe 20 minutes later, I heard another noise, this time from the back of the house. It was subtle at first, like a faint tapping, and then more distinct, like knuckles rapping against the glass. My kitchen had a window above the sink that looked out into the backyard. I stared at it from the living room, my blood running cold, because I could see the faint outline of something moving there. Someone tall enough to stand directly outside, their shadow shifting faintly in the dim light from inside. My throat tightened. I didn't want to go closer, but I couldn't look away either. Whoever it was, they tapped again, deliberate and slow. Not like someone knocking to be let in, like someone toying with me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 111, whispering to the operator that someone was outside my house. She told me to stay on the line, that a deputy was on the way. I crouched behind the couch, with heart pounding so loud I swore the person outside could hear it through the glass. The tapping stopped. Silence. I stayed frozen there, waiting for the sound of sirens, but instead I heard something else, the faint creak of wood, like weight settling on my porch boards. My blood turned to ice. They were moving around the house, slowly, deliberately, as if circling, testing doors, checking windows. I whispered this to the operator, and she told me to stay where I was. The minutes stretched painfully. I heard the crunch of gravel again, then silence. then the faint rustle of leaves near the tree line. When the deputy finally pulled up, lights flashing, I bolted to the door. He swept the yard with a flashlight, checked around the house, and found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone in the gravel. He told me it was probably some kid messing around, maybe a neighbor playing a prank. But my nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road, and no teenager was going to hike out here at 1 a.m. just to knock on my window. Still, with nothing to go on, he left after telling me to call again if I heard anything else. When the cruiser's taillights disappeared down the road, the silence pressed in heavier than before. I tried to calm myself, but every sound in that house made me jump. I finally decided to try and sleep, figuring exhaustion would take over. I left a lamp on in the living room and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door out of sheer paranoia. Laying there in the heat, the air too thick to breathe, I listened to every creak of the house, every insect outside. Slowly, I drifted into a restless doze. At around 3, I woke to the sound of something scratching. It was faint at first, like nails dragging lightly against wood. My chest clenched as I realized it was coming from the bedroom window right beside my bed. I froze, my eyes darting toward the curtains. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, like someone dragging their fingernails purposefully across the glass. My mouth went dry. I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't even breathe too loud. Then came the whisper. At first I thought it was the wind, but no. The voice was right outside the window, low and almost sing-song. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakably human. Someone was whispering to me through the glass. I finally snapped and shouted, "Go away!" My own voice sounded strange, high and panicked. The whispering stopped instantly. For a moment, silence. Then slowly I heard laughter, soft, low, and chilling, before it faded into the night. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I sat there until the first light of dawn crept into the room, too terrified to sleep again. When I finally worked up the nerve to check outside in daylight, I found something that made my stomach drop. Right below my bedroom window, etched into the dirt, were long drag marks, as if someone had crouched there for hours, shifting back and forth. And in the condensation on the glass itself, though mostly dried by the morning sun, I could still see faint smears, like someone had pressed their face up close, breathing against it. I moved out of that house within the month. I told people it was because the rent was too high, or because I wanted to be closer to town, but the truth was I couldn't stand another night there. I never saw whoever it was. I never found out what they wanted or why they chose my house. But to this day, summer nights don't feel peaceful to me anymore. The heat, the cicadas, the stillness, it all brings me back to that night when something in the dark decided I was worth watching. And I'll never forget the sound of that whisper at my window, like it knew my name. Story the end. The summer heat in our small American town had been relentless that year, the kind that clung to your skin even after the sun went down. I remember that night vividly because it was one of those evenings where the air itself felt heavy, almost suffocating. The kind of night where people left their windows open just to get some kind of breeze, even though it rarely came. I was 17, restless, and convinced that summer nights were meant to be lived, not wasted inside a sweltering house. It was late, maybe around 10:30, when I got a text from my friend, Jake. He lived only a few blocks away and suggested we hang out. We had this unspoken tradition during the summer. When the nights got too thick with boredom, we'd meet up, wander around town, sometimes walk down by the old river road. That night, though, Jake said we should go out to the abandoned fairgrounds. He swore he had found something weird out there a few nights before when he went biking past. I hesitated. The fairgrounds had been closed down for nearly a decade, left to rot on the edge of town. There were always stories floating around, kids daring each other to sneak inside, tales of strange lights or whispers at night. It was the kind of place parents told you not to go, but because they said that, it drew us in more. I didn't want to sound like a coward, so I said yes. I slipped out through the back door, careful not to wake my mom. The cicadas buzzed loud in the trees, and the air smelled of cut grass and hot pavement. I met Jake under the flickering streetlight at the corner. He was grinning, full of energy, the way he always was when he thought he'd discovered something exciting. We started walking. The streets were quiet, most houses dark except for the glow of televisions behind curtains. When we reached the outskirts of town, the pavement gave way to gravel, and eventually we were on the narrow dirt road leading to the fairgrounds. I had been there once as a kid, back when it was still running. I remembered the lights, the Ferris wheel towering against the sky, the smell of fried food and cotton candy. Now, as we approached, all I saw was a sagging chain-link fence and weeds that had claimed the place back. The fairgrounds looked like a skeleton of what it used to be. The Ferris wheel was still there, looming in the distance, but it was rusted, its cars dangling like broken teeth. The ticket booth was collapsed, and the midway was overgrown with tall grass. Even in the dark, the place radiated abandonment. Jake led the way, finding a hole in the fence that had been pulled back by other kids before us. We slipped through, our sneakers crunching on broken glass and gravel. "Check this out," he whispered, pulling out a flashlight. He didn't turn it on right away, almost as if he was waiting for the tension to settle in. But when he did, the beam caught bits of faded paint on the walls, old posters peeling away, and ride structures eaten alive by rust. We wandered deeper, past the remnants of food stands. The wooden signs still faintly read corn dogs and cold drinks, though the letters were warped and the paint bubbled. The smell here was different, earthy, like mold and damp wood. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night had gotten quieter. The cicadas we heard in town seemed to stop once we crossed the fence, and even the breeze through the weeds was muted. I told myself it was just because the place was so big and empty that sounds got lost here. Still, it made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Over here," Jake said, shining his flashlight toward one of the game booths. It was one of those where you toss a ball to knock down bottles. The counter was warped, stuffed animals hanging by threads. What caught my attention, though, was that the bottles were stacked neatly on the shelf. Not knocked over, not scattered. Stacked. I frowned. "That's weird. Who would bother with that?" Jake grinned, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Told you. When I came by on my bike, I swear I saw lights on in one of the booths, thought maybe homeless people or something. But doesn't this look too set up?" I wanted to agree, but something in me resisted. Maybe it was because agreeing meant admitting I was spooked too. I shrugged. Maybe it was just other kids, like us. He didn't look convinced, but we kept moving. We passed the carousel, its horses faded, some with broken legs. The beam of the flashlight swept across their faces, their painted eyes glossy and blank, and for a split second I thought one of them turned toward me. I told myself it was a trick of the light. We made our way toward the Ferris wheel, the giant looming shadow against the sky. When we reached the base, Jake stopped. He pointed the flashlight up, and the light followed the steel beams all the way to the top, where the cars swayed faintly in the night breeze. "Listen," Jake said suddenly. I froze. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then, faintly, like it was carried on the wind, I thought I heard music. A tune. High-pitched and warped, like an old calliope organ you'd hear at a carnival. It was faint, but it was there, weaving through the night. "Do you hear it?" Jake whispered. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." "Where's that coming from?" Neither of us spoke for a moment. The sound grew a little louder, but never clear enough to pinpoint. It was like it floated around us, always just out of reach. Jake wanted to find it. I wanted to leave. My gut screamed at me that we weren't supposed to be here, that something was wrong. But Jake laughed nervously and started walking toward the sound, his flashlight cutting through the dark. I followed, partly because I didn't want to be left behind, partly because curiosity had its claws in me too. We ended up near the old funhouse, its paint-chipped and faded clowns smiling grotesquely in the beam of the flashlight. The doors were broken, hanging off hinges. Inside it was dark, the kind of dark that swallowed the light before it reached the walls. The music seemed louder here, not blaring, not even close, but definitely stronger, as if it were seeping out of the funhouse itself. Jake glanced back at me, his grin faltering. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he said. I shook my head. "I don't like this, man." But Jake was already stepping inside. I cursed under my breath and followed. The air inside was different, colder somehow. The beam of the flashlight jittered across mirrors, cracked glass, and warped reflections. Our faces appeared distorted in 100 different ways, stretched tall or wide, some reflections lagging almost like they weren't moving in sync with us. We moved deeper, and that music seemed to pulse in and out, sometimes clearer, sometimes distant. My stomach twisted when we passed one mirror where my reflection didn't move at all until I was nearly past it, and then it turned its head sharply, catching up too fast. I told myself it was my imagination, a play of the shadows, but my throat went dry. "Jake," I whispered, "let's go back." He didn't answer at first. He was staring at something ahead. I followed his gaze and saw it. At the end of the hallway of mirrors, there was light, dim and yellow, like a lantern. It flickered faintly, casting shadows that shifted against the funhouse walls. We crept closer. My heart hammered so loud it drowned the cicadas outside. When we reached the end, we saw it wasn't a lantern. It was an old carnival lamp, one of those decorative bulbs. But it was lit, glowing faintly even though the place had no power. Jake whispered, "How the hell?" Then, before I could answer, we both froze. From deeper inside the funhouse came a sound. Not the warped carnival music anymore, but something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing against the hollow floorboards. We killed the flashlight instantly. Standing there in the dark, burst holding our breath. The footsteps grew louder, closer, steady as a metronome. Neither of us moved. My legs screamed to run, but something about the sound rooted me in place. Then, faintly, a voice joined the footsteps. A whisper at first, then clearer. "Who's here?" It wasn't an angry voice. It wasn't loud. It was soft, almost sing-song, like someone playing a game. Jake grabbed my arm, his nails digging into my skin. The footsteps stopped. Silence. We didn't breathe. Then suddenly, from the darkness of the funhouse, a laugh echoed. High-pitched, childlike, but twisted, too long, too sharp. That was enough. We bolted, crashing through the hall of mirrors, not caring about the noise. The flashlight swung wildly in Jake's hand, catching flashes of distorted faces and glinting glass. Behind us, the laugh came again, closer this time, as if it was chasing us. We burst out of the funhouse into the hot night air, gasping. The music was gone. The cicadas were back. For a moment, everything looked normal, like we had imagined it all. But when Jake swung the flashlight back toward the funhouse entrance, we both saw it, just for a second. A figure standing in the doorway. Tall, too tall, with limbs that bent wrong, its head tilted unnaturally like it was curious. And then, as the light hit it, it vanished. We didn't stop running until we were back through the fence and on the main road, panting, drenched in sweat that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Jake said, "We don't talk about this, ever." I nodded. We both knew no one would believe us anyway. But later that night, lying in bed, I could still hear it. That laugh, faint in the back of my mind, like it had followed me home. And when I glanced at my mirror across the room, for just a split second, I swear I saw my reflection smile before I did. Story the end. It was one of those heavy summer nights where the air clung to your skin and carried the smell of damp grass and dust. In small towns, nights like that brought people outside, sitting on porches with fans pointed at them, or dragging lawn chairs into the yard just to catch a breeze that almost never came. My hometown in Indiana didn't have much going on, and the summers were always the same. Kids biking through the neighborhood, parents yelling at mosquitoes, and teenagers like me looking for something to break up the monotony. That summer, I was 17, restless, and desperate for something beyond the endless cycle of mowing lawns, hanging out at the gas station parking lot, and drinking flat sodas. My friends Ryan and Derek felt the same way. We'd gotten into the habit of meeting late at night after the cicadas had quieted, when the town seemed to finally go to sleep. Sometimes we'd drive aimlessly. Other times we'd end up at the old quarry or behind the school. It was stupid, harmless stuff, until that one night in July when things shifted into something still can't explain. It started with Ryan's idea. He always had a knack for pushing us into things we didn't entirely want to do. He'd heard about an old farmhouse on the edge of town, supposedly abandoned for decades. Everyone knew it, the Whitefield place. The house sat at the end of a narrow country road, swallowed by trees, its windows shattered and its paint long since peeled away. Kids at school dared each other to go there, but most never actually did. There were stories that the Whitefield family had just vanished one night back in the 60s, leaving food on the table and laundry in the washer. Others said the father had lost his mind and done something unspeakable to his wife and kids. No one ever seemed to agree on the details. But the house's reputation kept it empty all these years. "Come on, man. It's summer. We need a story to tell," Ryan insisted as we sat on the hood of Derek's car in the gas station parking lot. The sodium lights buzzed above us, drawing moths into their glow. "I'm not breaking into some place just because you're bored," Derek muttered, always the cautious one. Ryan grinned, his teeth catching the light. "We're not breaking in. It's abandoned. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We walk around, maybe take a few pictures, and leave. Easy." I should have said no. Everything in me told me it was a bad idea, but boredom is a dangerous thing. Within the hour, we were piled into Derek's beat-up Civic, heading down Route 6. The windows rolled down, hot wind rushing in. The road out there was barely lit, just stretches of cornfields broken up by patches of woods. Eventually, Derek slowed, turned onto a cracked driveway half hidden by weeds, and the headlights revealed the silhouette of the Whitefield farmhouse. It loomed out of the darkness, larger than I expected. The roof sagged in places, the wood siding had rotted to gray, and vines clung to every corner like they were trying to drag the place into the ground. The front porch was caved in on one side, the railings splintered. No lights, no sounds, just the oppressive stillness of a hot summer night. "Jesus," Derek whispered. "This place looks like it's about to fall over." Ryan was already out of the car, swinging his flashlight beam across the yard. Perfect. I hesitated before stepping out. The grass was knee-high, sticky with humidity. Fireflies blinked in and out, their light disappearing the closer we got to the house. That struck me as odd. Even bugs seemed to avoid the place. We pushed through the grass, boards crunching under our sneakers as we stepped onto what was left of the porch. Derek shined his light on the front door. The paint had once been red, but was now faded to a dull, flaking pink. The knob was still there, rusted but intact. Ryan grabbed it, gave it a twist, and with a groan, the door swung inward. The smell hit first. A mix of mildew, rot, and something sour like wet carpet left too long in a basement. The beam of Ryan's flashlight cut through the dark, revealing an entryway littered with broken glass and plaster chunks. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling like dead leaves. "See? Nothing to worry about," Ryan said, stepping inside without hesitation. His footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. Derek and I followed, though every instinct screamed to turn back. The air inside was heavier somehow, warmer, and each breath felt thick in my lungs. I glanced toward the staircase in the center of the room, its railing broken, steps warped. To the right, a living room opened up, the remains of a couch and chairs still there, their fabric eaten away by time. We wandered deeper, shining our lights into the kitchen. A table still stood there, its surface thick with dust, but I could see the outline of plates, a cup tipped onto its side, as if someone had left in a hurry. The fridge door hung open, empty. Cabinets yawned with missing doors. "Creepy, but cool," Ryan said, snapping pictures on his phone. I moved toward a small hallway off the kitchen, leading to the back of the house. My flashlight beam landed on a door slightly ajar. Something about it unsettled me more than anything else so far. "Don't," Derek muttered behind me, noticing where I was looking. But Ryan pushed past us. "Come on, man. We're here to explore." He shoved the door open, and the beam illuminated a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. The smell was worse there. Damp, almost metallic. My stomach turned. "Nope," Derek said, stepping back. "We're not going down there." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Fine. Stay up here. I'm going." He started down, the beam of his flashlight bobbing with each step. I hesitated, then followed, because as much as I wanted to leave, the thought of letting him go alone felt worse. Derek cursed under his breath, but after a moment his footsteps followed behind us. The basement was colder, the air heavier. Our lights revealed crumbling concrete walls, shelves lined with rusted cans, and what looked like the remains of a workbench. But it wasn't the objects that made my skin crawl, it was the feeling. A pressure, like the weight of the house itself, pressing down on us. "Man, this is wild," Ryan said, sweeping his light across the far wall. That's when it caught on something. A door. Metal. Bolted shut, low to the ground, almost hidden behind stacked boxes. It didn't look like the rest of the house. Too new, too solid. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice low. "Let's find out," Ryan said, already moving toward it. "Ryan, seriously." Derek started, but stopped when Ryan tugged at the bolts. They rattled, but didn't budge. We stood there, the three of us, staring at that strange door in the basement of a house that shouldn't have anything modern in it. The silence around us deepened, pressing into our ears. Then I heard it. Faint, muffled, like the dragging of something across the floor on the other side. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Ryan froze, hands still on the bolt. Derek's light trembled as he pointed it toward the door. The sound came again, a slow scrape, then silence. "That's enough. We're leaving," Derek said, his voice firm, but I could hear the fear under it. Ryan finally stepped back, his grin gone. "Fine." We left the basement quickly, maybe too quickly, our footsteps loud on the old wood. Back in the living room, the air felt slightly lighter, but not by much. I swear the shadows seemed darker now, the corners deeper. As we stepped toward the front door, something moved upstairs. Not a creak of old wood settling. This was footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the floor above us. All three of us froze, staring up at the ceiling. "There's no one here," Derek said, almost to convince himself. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in again. We bolted. Out the door, through the tall grass, back into the car. Derek fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to start the engine. When the headlights hit the house again, I swore I saw a curtain shift in an upstairs window, though there hadn't been curtains when we first looked. No one spoke on the drive back. The air in the car was stifling, but none of us rolled the windows down. By the time Derek pulled into the gas station lot again, it was past midnight. We sat there, engines idling, not wanting to talk about what we'd heard. Over the next week, I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just an old house making sounds, that the door in the basement was just some storm shelter or storage. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, especially that dragging sound. Ryan, of course, wanted to go back. He brought it up 2 nights later, insisting we'd only scratched the surface. Derek flat out refused. I told him no too, though my voice shook when I said it. Then things started happening. The first was Ryan calling me in the middle of the night. "Dude, I swear someone's outside my house," he whispered. I could hear him breathing hard. He said he'd looked through his blinds and saw a figure standing across the street, just beyond the glow of the streetlight. He blinked, and it was gone. 2 nights after that, Derek texted me at 3 a.m. He said he woke up to the sound of footsteps in his hallway, but when he opened his bedroom door, no one was there. His parents were asleep, doors shut, and me, I woke to scratching at my window. I live on the 2nd floor. There's no way anyone could have been up there. By the end of the week, all 3 of us stopped sleeping well. The summer night that had once felt endless and carefree now carried a weight, every shadow stretching too far, every sound amplified. None of us went back to the Whitefield place, but it didn't feel like we'd left it behind either. One night, about a week after we first went, I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. My heart stopped. I'd locked it before bed. I always did. Slowly I sat up, the room dark except for the glow of the streetlight outside my window. The door was open a few inches. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then I heard it. That same dragging sound, faint but unmistakable, moving across my floor. I still don't know how long I sat there, frozen, until finally I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the room. Empty. Nothing there. But the door, it was wide open now. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When I met Ryan and Derek the next day, they both looked like hell. Dark circles under their eyes, pale faces. None of us wanted to say it, but we knew. Whatever was in that house, whatever we'd stirred up, it had followed us home, and summer nights haven't felt the same since. Story the end. It was one of those heavy summer nights where the heat doesn't let up even after the sun has disappeared. The kind of night where the crickets never stop and the air clings to your skin like a wet cloth. I was 19 that summer, home from college for a few months, and desperate for anything that felt like freedom. My parents lived just outside of a small town in upstate New York, surrounded by woods, and though I had grown up there, coming back after a year of city life made everything feel different. Darker somehow, more isolating. A group of us, my friend Jordan, his cousin Matt, and a girl named Emily I knew from high school, decided to go out that Friday night. There wasn't much to do around town besides hang out at the old quarry, drink cheap beer, and talk until the mosquitoes drove you home. It wasn't legal to be there, but that's what made it feel like the right place to go. The quarry had always been a hangout spot for kids from our school, a huge pit filled with still, dark water, surrounded by trees that pressed in so tightly it felt like a different world. That night, around 9, we met up at the gas station parking lot. The summer sky was still holding on to the last bit of twilight, painted in streaks of orange and purple. Jordan tossed me a six-pack from the trunk of his beat-up Honda. We piled into his car with the windows down, blasting music as we drove down the winding country roads. By the time we pulled off onto the dirt trail that led to the quarry, night had fully settled. The air smelled like pine, earth, and the faint scent of rain, even though the sky was clear. We parked the car and hiked in, our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we pushed through the brush. The quarry always looked different at night, an inky void of water, the edges jagged with crumbling rock and graffiti sprayed across the cliffs from years of kids sneaking out here. We sat close to the edge, passing around beers, the only light coming from the small flame of Jordan's lighter when he lit a cigarette. The night was loud with insects and frogs, but somehow it still felt too quiet. I remember Emily saying something about how eerie the water looked, that it seemed blacker than black, like it was swallowing the light. She told us a story she'd heard years ago, that a boy had drowned there in the 80s, and his body hadn't been found for 2 weeks. Some said he still floated just below the surface, waiting for someone to come too close. We all laughed it off, but something in the way she said it stuck with me. Around midnight, Matt suggested we go swimming. He was always the reckless one, already stripping down to his shorts before anyone had agreed. Jordan tried to talk him out of it, warning him that the quarry was deeper than it looked, with sharp rocks hidden below. But Matt ignored him, ran, and dove headfirst into the water with a splash that echoed across the cliffs. We all leaned over the edge, flashlights flickering across the rippling surface. For a moment, there was nothing but bubbles. Then Matt resurfaced, laughing and yelling for us to join him. Emily shook her head, hugging her knees tightly, saying she didn't want to. Jordan and I exchanged a look before I finally gave in. The summer heat had been unbearable, and the thought of cool water was too tempting. I left my shirt and shoes on the rocks and jumped in. The water was shockingly cold, swallowing me instantly. When I surfaced, my breath caught from the chill, but there was something else too, a strange stillness, like the water around me wasn't moving right. Matt swam over and splashed me, laughing, and for a while it felt normal. But then I felt it. Something brushed against my leg. I froze, treading water, trying to tell myself it was just a fish or some plants. But the quarry didn't really have much life in it. The touch hadn't been soft either. It felt like fingers. "Did you feel that?" I asked Matt, but he was too busy goofing around to listen. I swam back toward the rocks, pulling myself up onto the ledge where Emily sat. My chest heaved, my skin prickling even though the night air was warm. Emily looked at me, her expression tense. "Something's wrong with this place," she whispered. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease was spreading through me. Matt was still out in the water, his head bobbing as he floated on his back, staring at the stars. Jordan eventually gave in too, stripping off his shirt and jumping in, splashing near his cousin. I watched them, trying to shake the feeling that someone else was out there with them, just under the surface. It was around then that we all heard it. A sound carried across the water, not a splash, not one of us. It was a low, dragging noise like something heavy being pulled through the shallows. We all froze, flashlights darting toward the opposite bank, but there was nothing. Just trees, shadows, and silence that seemed to swallow everything else. Matt called out, "Who's there?" But his voice cracked a little. No one answered. The air shifted then. The night sounds, the crickets, the frogs cut off all at once. The kind of silence that makes your stomach drop. I swear I could hear my own heartbeat. Then came the splash. It wasn't close to us, but it wasn't far either. Something had entered the water on the far side. Matt swam back toward the rocks faster than I'd ever seen him move. Jordan followed, both of them scrambling up onto the ledge, dripping and shivering despite the heat. We all sat there, staring at the water, the four of us huddled together. No one spoke. The surface of the quarry rippled slightly, as if something just beneath had disturbed it. My flashlight flickered, and for a second I thought I saw something pale under the water, something shaped like a hand. But when I blinked, it was gone. Emily whispered that we should leave, and for once, no one argued. We grabbed our things and hurried back along the trail, tripping over roots and stones, desperate to get back to the car. Every sound in the woods seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves under our feet, the snap of a branch somewhere behind us. When we finally reached the car, Jordan fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Just as he unlocked it, there was another sound. From the woods behind us came the unmistakable splash of something huge hitting water, like a body diving in. The four of us froze, staring into the darkness. Then Jordan shoved the keys into the ignition, and we peeled out of there, gravel flying behind us. No one said much on the drive back. The music stayed off, the only sound the hum of the tires on asphalt. When Jordan dropped me off at my house, he just muttered a quick goodbye before speeding off. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. The image of the quarry kept playing in my head, the way the water had looked too dark, too still, and the touch on my leg, cold, deliberate. I told myself it was my imagination, the alcohol, the atmosphere. But then I heard it again. A splash. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. It sounded like it came from the woods behind my house, the same direction as the quarry. I sat frozen in bed, straining my ears. Then silence. The next day, I tried to brush it off. But when I saw Emily at the diner later that week, she looked pale and tired, her eyes ringed with dark circles. She leaned in and told me she'd heard it too, that same night after she got home. A splash outside her window. And she lived miles from me, in the opposite direction from the quarry. We didn't tell anyone else. Not Jordan, not Matt. It felt like saying it out loud would make it worse, more real. But sometimes in the years since, I'll wake up in the middle of a hot summer night, heart pounding, the air heavy and suffocating, and I'll swear I hear it again, the sound of water being disturbed, as though something or someone has followed me home. I've never gone back to the quarry. None of us have. But every summer, when the nights get unbearably hot and the cicadas buzz loud enough to drown your thoughts, I lie awake and wait for that sound. Sometimes I hear nothing, and sometimes faintly in the distance, there's a splash. Story, the end. The air was heavy that night, the kind of thick summer air that made it feel like the entire world was holding its breath. I was 21 that summer, home from college and staying at my parents' house in rural Pennsylvania. The house sat at the edge of a wooded patch about a 10-minute drive from town, and in the summer the nights stretched long and restless. It was one of those nights when you couldn't sleep, when the crickets and cicadas seemed louder than usual, and the humidity clung to your skin even in bed. I'd been tossing and turning for hours, staring at the glowing red numbers of my alarm clock, until I finally decided to get up and go for a drive just to clear my head. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I slid into my old Honda and started down the back road that led toward town. My parents' house sat far enough out that there were no streetlights, just winding asphalt lit by my headlights cutting through the darkness. With the windows down, I could feel the warm breeze carrying the smell of cut grass and the faint musk of the woods. It was peaceful in a strange way, but also unnerving, because once you were out there alone, every rustle in the trees felt louder, every shadow felt like it had weight. I wasn't in any rush, so I just drove slowly, the radio playing faintly in the background. I must have gone 3 or 4 miles down when I noticed something odd. Up ahead, on the side of the road, there was someone walking. At first, I thought it was just a late-night jogger or maybe someone heading home from a party, but the closer I got, the stranger it seemed. The figure was walking with a limp, moving slowly, almost dragging one leg behind. The person wasn't wearing reflective gear or carrying a flashlight, just dark clothing that made them almost disappear against the night. I slowed down as I passed, glancing out the window. It was a man, maybe in his 30s, tall and gaunt with messy hair that clung to his forehead. His clothes looked dirty, maybe even torn in places, and he didn't look at me as I passed. He just kept his eyes on the ground, trudging forward with that strange limp. Something about him unsettled me, but I told myself not to overthink it. People walk at night all the time. Maybe he had car trouble or was coming back from work. Still, I couldn't shake the image of him in the rearview mirror, fading into the darkness of the road until he was just a memory in my headlights. I ended up driving all the way into town, circling the empty main street a few times before heading back. By the time I turned down my road again, it was after 2:15, and I felt tired enough to try sleeping. The night was still, the air even heavier, and as I rolled past the stretch where I'd seen the man before, my stomach dropped. He was still there, but this time he wasn't walking. He was standing at the side of the road, facing the direction of my parents' house. The way he stood, it was like he was waiting. His body was angled slightly forward, his head low, and I swear as I passed this time, his eyes flicked toward me. My pulse kicked up hard in my chest, and I pressed the gas a little more than I meant to, eager to put distance between us. I tried to shake it off once I got home. I locked the car, went inside, bolted the door, and headed straight upstairs. The house was quiet, my parents long asleep, and I lay back down telling myself it was nothing, just some guy, just a coincidence. But even with the fan blowing and the hum of insects outside, I couldn't relax. My ears felt tuned to every sound, the creaks of the house, the occasional rustle from outside. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was faint, but it was there, coming from outside my bedroom window, the sound of footsteps in the grass. I froze, my eyes darting toward the open window. The screen was down, but there was no mistaking the sound. Slow, deliberate crunches in the dry summer lawn, moving around the side of the house. My heart thudded in my ears, and I sat up carefully, straining to listen. The steps paused. Then, a moment later, there was the sound of a low scrape against the siding, like fingernails dragging across the wood. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. My phone was on the nightstand, but I was terrified to move too quickly, like whoever was out there would hear me. I slid it into my hands, dialing 911 as quietly as I could. My voice shook as I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining that someone was outside my house. She told me to stay inside, stay quiet, that police were on their way. I sat there in the dark, every second stretching forever. The footsteps came again, circling the house, slow and deliberate. Once, they stopped directly beneath my window, and I could almost feel eyes on me through the thin screen. My mouth went dry, and I remember gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles hurt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of footsteps retreated. I sat there listening until I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance. When the police arrived, I hurried downstairs to let them in. They searched the yard, the woods, the entire perimeter, but found nothing. No one, not even footprints clear enough to follow. One officer asked me if I might have imagined it, and I wanted to scream at him. But the dispatcher had heard the fear in my voice, and they at least took a report. I barely slept the rest of that night. The next morning, the summer sun blazed down and everything looked normal again. Too normal, like the night before had been some fever dream. My parents brushed it off as maybe a stray animal making noise, but I knew what I'd heard. Later that day, though, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Out by the side of the house, near my window, the grass was trampled down in a pattern that didn't look like deer or raccoon. It looked like footprints. Human ones. I didn't tell my parents. For the next few nights, I barely slept, every sound outside making me jump. Days passed and nothing happened. I convinced myself maybe it was over, maybe whoever it was had moved on, but a week later, it happened again. This time, I was awake when I heard it. It was just after midnight, and I was reading with a lamp on when I caught movement outside from the corner of my eye. I turned my head toward the window, and for the briefest second, I saw him. That same man from the road, standing in the tree line. He was just far enough back that the shadows cloaked him, but his posture was unmistakable, still intent, watching. I scrambled to turn off the light, heart hammering in my chest, and when I looked back, he was gone. The next day, I drove around in broad daylight, retracing the roads, looking for any sign of him. But he wasn't there. The summer dragged on like that, nights filled with dread, days pretending everything was normal. I never told my friends or family the full extent of it, afraid they'd think I was losing my mind. But I knew he was real. I knew he was watching. The last time I saw him was in early August. I'd just come home late from visiting a friend around 11:30 p.m. pulling into the driveway, my headlights swept across the front yard, and for a split second I saw movement near the porch. My stomach dropped, and I killed the engine, sitting frozen in the dark. And then I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the yard, half in shadow, facing me. His clothes were still ragged, his body still gaunt, but this time I could see his face. He was smiling, not a friendly smile, a twisted, deliberate curl of his lips that sent ice down my spine. I locked the doors, fumbling for my phone, and before I could even dial, he turned and slipped back into the woods. The police came again, searched again, and found nothing. No sign of him. Summer ended, and I went back to college. I haven't seen him since. But every summer night when the air gets thick and the cicadas scream in the trees, I remember that smile. And I still wonder if one day I'll look out a window and see him standing there again, waiting. Story, the end. It was the kind of summer night that sticks with you, not because of anything spectacular, but because the ordinary becomes unsettling in the dark. I was 21, home for the summer from college, working at a convenience store in a small town in Missouri. The heat was oppressive that evening, the air thick and stagnant like soup, with no breeze to offer relief. The cicadas droned relentlessly, filling the night with their shrill chorus. My shift had ended around midnight, and I decided to walk the 3 miles home rather than wait for a ride. The route took me past the edge of town, near the old Miller farm, which had been abandoned for years. Folks said the place was haunted, but I never believed in that stuff. It was just a crumbling farmhouse surrounded by overgrown fields. As I left the store, the streetlights flickered sporadically, casting weak pools of yellow light on cracked pavement. I had my headphones in, listening to a playlist to pass the time, and the hum of the cicadas under the music almost lulled me into a calm state. But as I passed the farmhouse, the hairs on my arms prickled. The air felt different here, cooler and heavier. The smell shifted from the sweet scent of honeysuckle to something musky, like damp earth mixed with rot. I pulled out one earbud and slowed my pace, scanning the darkness. Then I saw it, or more accurately, I sensed it. From the edge of the trees lining the farm, a movement caught my eye. A figure stepped out from the shadows, tall, but not quite human. Its limbs were elongated, awkwardly bent at odd angles, and it moved with a slow, jerky gait. Its skin had a sickly gray pallor, and its eyes reflected the dim streetlight with an eerie, unnatural glow. I froze. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. A homeless person, maybe, or someone playing a trick, but the figure didn't behave like a human. It tilted its head slowly as if studying me, making no attempt to approach, just watching. My heart hammered against my ribs. I slowly backed away, keeping my eyes fixed on the figure. As I retreated, it began to move, gliding across the cracked pavement with a disturbing smoothness, faster than any human should be capable. I broke into a run, adrenaline surging as I sprinted down the street, the cicadas seeming to vanish from the night. Behind me, I heard a strange, guttural noise, a mix between a growl and a whisper. I dared not look back, but the sound grew closer, faster, and more urgent. I reached my front porch, gasping for breath, fumbling with my keys as the noise neared the end of the street. When I finally turned the key and slammed the door shut behind me, I leaned against it, chest heaving, trying to calm down. The house was quiet, but I could still hear faint rustling outside, as if the figure was pacing just beyond the yard. I called my best friend Sarah and told her everything. She told me I probably imagined it, that heat and exhaustion mess with your head, but I knew what I saw. The next day, I drove back to the farmhouse during daylight, determined to find evidence. The farm was empty, except for the usual weeds and the skeleton of the old barn. But on the cracked pavement where I'd seen the figure, there were strange, deep scratches gouged into the concrete like talon marks. I took pictures and showed them to Sarah, but she just shook her head. That summer, the figure appeared to me 2 more times. Once at the edge of the woods near a creek where I used to go fishing, and once standing silently by the side of a deserted road at night. Each time it never spoke or approached directly, just watched with those glowing eyes and retreated when I tried to follow. After the third encounter, I stopped going out alone at night. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes feeling like something is watching me from the corner of my room. And every summer, When the nights get hot and the cicadas come out in full force, I wonder if that thing is still out there, waiting, watching, patient as the shadows grow longer. Story the end. The summer of 1998 was the kind of summer everyone remembers. The heat was relentless, stretching the days longer and the nights thicker with humidity. In the small town of Cedar Grove, nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills of Virginia, the nights held a certain weight, the kind of weight that made the air feel heavy and slow, as if time itself was dragging through molasses. I was 19 then, just finished with my first year of college, and home for the summer before my second year began. Cedar Grove was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were usually hard to keep. But some things, as I would learn, were better left buried beneath the old dirt roads and the dense woods that encircled the town. My friends and I spent most evenings out in the open, sitting on porches or gathered around bonfires, telling stories and drinking cheap beer. The usual summer stuff. But one night, something happened that shifted everything. Something I wouldn't speak about for years because I couldn't explain it and feared no one would believe me. That night started like any other. A group of us, me, my best friend Matt, his younger sister Claire, and our mutual friend Jenna, decided to drive out to the old Miller farm. It had been abandoned for decades, and stories swirled about why. Some said the owner had vanished mysteriously, others whispered about strange lights seen around the barn. Whatever the truth, it had become a sort of dare spot for the local kids. We piled into Matt's battered Chevy Silverado around 9 p.m., the sky still glowing faintly orange from the dying sun. The air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and pine, and the cicadas were already humming in their nightly chorus. "Think we'll actually see something spooky tonight?" Jenna joked from the back seat, twisting her long hair nervously. Matt grinned as he shifted gears. "If we do, I'll buy you a six-pack." Claire rolled her eyes, but smiled. "You're on." I sat beside Matt, staring out the window as the truck rumbled down the winding country roads, the headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The closer we got to the Miller farm, the quieter the world seemed to become. The radio played low and distant, as if muffled by the thick woods that lined both sides of the road. The farm was still about a mile past the last bend, down a narrow dirt lane bordered by overgrown fields. When Matt finally slowed, I could see the silhouette of the old farmhouse, its roof sagging, windows shattered, and the barn leaning like a tired old man. We parked near the edge of the field, stepping out into the warm night. The air was alive with the buzzing of moths and the rustling of leaves, but otherwise quiet. Not a sound from the nearby woods, which seemed unnatural. Claire pulled a flashlight from her backpack, and Jenna clicked hers on as well. We began to walk toward the barn, the beam of light cutting a path through the darkness. "Let's stick together," Matt said, his voice low. "Remember what happened last time Tim and I came here?" I nodded grimly. Tim was another friend who had dared Matt to come out here the previous summer. He never returned home that night. He had disappeared without a trace. The search lasted weeks, but no one found a clue. The whole town still whispered about it, but no one talked openly. As we reached the barn door, it creaked on its rusty hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, an almost metallic tang that made my nose wrinkle. The flashlight beam swept across broken farming equipment, cobwebs, and old crates. "Looks like nothing but an old barn," Jenna muttered, her voice shaky. We moved further in, the floorboards creaking underfoot. Then Claire stopped suddenly. "Guys, look!" She pointed toward the far wall where something strange caught the light, a faded symbol scratched into the wood. It was a crude circle with strange lines radiating from it. None of us recognized it, but it looked ancient, worn by time and weather. Matt ran his fingers over it, frowning. "I don't like this. Maybe it's some old ritual crap." I agreed. There was a heaviness to the air, a sense that something was watching us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Suddenly, the flashlight beams flickered and went out. Total darkness swallowed us. For a moment, panic set in. Jenna gasped. Claire whispered, "What the hell?" Matt swore and tried to click his flashlight back on. Nothing. The air felt colder now, despite the summer heat. A low sound began, like distant footsteps crunching on dry leaves, circling around the barn. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The footsteps grew louder, closer, but no one else spoke. We stood frozen, the silence heavier than before, waiting. Then from the corner of the barn, a faint light appeared, soft and flickering like a candle. It bobbed in and out of sight, weaving slowly toward us. Jenna grabbed my arm. "We should get out of here." Matt moved toward the door, pushing it open. The light vanished as suddenly as it appeared. We bolted outside, heartbeats pounding in our ears. The night air hit us like a wave, warm and sticky again. As we scrambled to the truck, I glanced back toward the barn. For a split second, in the flickering shadows by the broken windows, I saw a figure. A man, or something like one, tall and thin with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. I blinked, and he was gone. Matt slammed the door and gunned the engine. We sped down the dirt lane, like not stopping until the lights of Cedar Grove welcomed us back like a safe harbor. For days afterward, I felt like I was being watched. At night, strange noises echoed outside my window. The scraping of branches, whispers too low to understand. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to walk down to the edge of the woods near my house. The moon was full, bright enough to see the path clearly. As I reached the tree line, I heard it, a voice, soft, calling my name. "James." I froze, heart in my throat. The voice was familiar but wrong, distorted, echoing like it came from far away and close at the same time. "James, come closer." Something moved in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted. The voice whispered again, this time closer, almost at my ear. "Don't forget us." I stumbled back, breaking free of the trance, and sprinted home. The next morning, Matt told me the police had found a set of footprints near the Miller farm, fresh and muddy. They disappeared into the woods and never came out. We never spoke about that summer night again. But every year, when the heat settles thick and the cicadas start their song, I remember the light in the barn and the man with glowing eyes. Some secrets in Cedar Grove don't stay buried. Story. The end. The summer of 1998 was, by all accounts, the kind of summer every kid in our small Midwestern town lived for. Long days stretched into endless nights filled with the kind of freedom only teenagers can fully appreciate. The streets were empty after dinner time, the heat clinging to every inch of skin like a second layer, and the smell of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint scent of barbecue drifting through the air. It was the kind of summer night that made you feel alive. Invincible, even. My name's Mark, and I was 17 that year. I was home from my junior year in high school, working a part-time job at the local grocery store and hanging out with my friends every chance I got. It was the last week before school started again, and the usual crowd was ready to squeeze every ounce of fun out of those remaining days. One night, it was just me, my best friend Josh, and his younger sister Abby. The three of us were driving around town, windows down, music blaring, trying to find a place to hang out away from our nosy parents. Josh's mom had a beat-up old Chevy pickup, the kind with a bench seat and rust spots that somehow made it cooler than anything else on the road. We decided to head to Miller's Creek, a spot about 20 minutes outside town, where the river widened into a shallow swimming hole surrounded by trees. It was the perfect place to cool off, but we planned to go after dark. There was something thrilling about sitting by the water under the stars, the world shrinking down to just you and the night. When we arrived, the air was thick and humid, and the moon hung low and bright, casting silver shadows across the water. We unpacked a cooler with sodas and some sandwiches Josh's mom had packed, then spread out a blanket on the grassy bank. The crickets chirped in a steady rhythm, and the faint sound of the river flowing over rocks was soothing. We talked about everything and nothing, summer plans, college dreams, the weird kids at school, but after a while, the conversation slowed. The kind of quiet that feels comfortable until it isn't. I remember looking up at the tree line where the woods pressed close to the water's edge and feeling this sudden chill run down my spine. The temperature hadn't dropped, not really, but something about the way the shadows shifted made me uneasy. Josh noticed, too. He stopped joking and leaned forward, eyes scanning the darkness. "You hear that?" he asked, voice low. At first, I thought he meant the usual night sounds, the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, but this was different, a faint crackling like twigs snapping underfoot coming from deeper in the woods. Abby pulled her knees up to her chest. "Maybe it's just some animal," she said, trying to sound brave. But the sound wasn't moving away, it was getting closer. We all fell silent, listening. Then from the edge of the trees, a shape stepped into the clearing. At first, it was just a shadow, thin and tall. Then the moonlight caught the glint of eyes, too bright, too fixed. The figure was a man, or at least something that looked like one. He wore a long, dark coat, though the summer heat made it seem impossible. His face was pale and gaunt, with sharp cheekbones that made him look almost skeletal. We froze. Josh grabbed my arm. "Who are you?" he called out. No answer. The man took a step forward, slow and deliberate, and something about his movement was wrong. Too stiff, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Abby whimpered, and Josh grabbed her hand, pulling her behind him. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. We started backing away, but the man didn't move. He just stood there, watching us with those impossible eyes. The moonlight seemed to fade, and suddenly the woods around us grew darker, as if a shadow had fallen over the clearing. I don't remember running, but the next thing I knew, we were piled into the truck, doors slamming behind us. Josh started the engine, tires spinning as we tore back down the dirt road. When we glanced back, the man was gone. We never spoke about what we saw that night, not at first. The thing was, it didn't feel like a nightmare or a trick of the light. It felt real, like something ancient, waiting in those woods for years, watching the river flow and the summer nights slip away. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening in town. People reported seeing the same pale figure near the creek, sometimes standing by the old mill or at the edge of the cemetery. Dogs would bark and refuse to go near the water after dark. The town felt... One night, I was walking home late when I saw him again, standing across the street under a flickering street lamp. He looked right at me, eyes glowing faintly. I froze. Then he smiled. A terrible, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. I ran the rest of the way home. Years later, I found out the creek was once the site of a tragic accident. A man who'd lost his family drowned there in the early 1900s. Some said he never left. Some called him the Watcher of Miller's Creek. A restless soul caught between worlds, drawn to the water and the living. I don't know what he was or why he appeared to us that night. But I know one thing. Those summer nights are never quite the same after you meet something that shouldn't exist. Something waiting just beyond the trees, silent and watching. Every summer since then, when the heat sticks to my skin and the cicadas hum in the darkness, I think about that night by the river. And I wonder if he's still out there waiting for the next group of kids who think the night belongs to them. Story the end. The summer heat in our small Midwestern town was always something you felt long after the sun dipped below the horizon. That night was no different. The kind of heavy, sticky heat that made even the darkness feel oppressive, like a blanket you couldn't pull away from. I was 17 and had just finished my shift at the local grocery store. The sun had set hours ago, but the air still carried the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with faint traces of gasoline from passing cars. It was late, past midnight, but I figured I'd take a walk around the block before heading home, just to clear my head after a long day. Our neighborhood was quiet at that hour. Streetlights flickered dimly, their halos stretched thin in the humid air. Most houses had their porch lights off, windows shuttered, and the occasional muffled sound of a late-night TV or someone's late-night conversation drifted out. I liked the solitude. Walking alone under a sky full of stars always felt calming, even if the air was thick enough to swim through. As I strolled down the cracked sidewalks, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my friend Claire texting, asking if I wanted to come over. I typed back a quick yes and started toward her house. We'd planned to hang out, maybe watch a movie or just talk. The walk wasn't long, maybe 10 minutes, but the neighborhood was a little different at night. Shadows stretched long and deep, and the usual daytime chatter was replaced by eerie silence. Halfway there, I noticed a figure standing across the street near the edge of the park, under a dying street lamp. It was hard to make out details. The lamp buzzed intermittently, casting a yellow glow that flickered over the figure's face and body. It looked like a man, tall and lean, dressed in dark clothes, but there was something off about him. The way he stood was unnatural, almost stiff, like a mannequin left outside too long. He wasn't moving or looking around, just staring straight ahead, directly at me. I slowed my pace, heart starting to pound. The street was empty except for him. I thought about crossing to the other side or turning around, but I figured maybe he was just waiting for someone, or maybe he was a neighbor out for a smoke. When I took another step forward, the man tilted his head ever so slightly. That's when I saw his eyes, cold and unblinking, reflecting the street lamp's light in a way that made them look almost glassy. I swallowed hard and tried to keep walking, telling myself I was overthinking it, but then he started to move. Not walking, but gliding. His feet didn't seem to touch the ground. With each step, his body stayed eerily straight, and there was no sound of footsteps. The street lamp buzzed louder, flickered wildly, and then, suddenly, the light cut out completely, plunging everything into darkness. For a moment, I stood frozen, heart racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. The only thing I could see was the faint outline of the figure moving toward me. I fumbled for my phone to turn on the flashlight, my fingers trembling so badly it took a few tries. When the beam finally clicked on, I swept it over the street, but the man was gone. The silence came rushing back, heavier than before. I took a deep breath and started walking again, but faster this time, toward Claire's house. I kept checking over my shoulder, but there was no sign of him. When I finally got inside, Claire's porch light was on. I told her what happened, expecting her to laugh it off, but her face went pale. "That's what they call the Watcher," she said quietly. I stared at her. "What?" She explained that years ago, some people in town started talking about a strange man who showed up on summer nights, usually around midnight. No one knew who he was or where he came from. He didn't speak, didn't interact, just appeared and watched. Some said he was a ghost, others thought he was a man with a mental illness. But every sighting ended the same. People felt watched, followed, and some reported nightmares or waking up to find marks on their skin like scratches. I thought it was just a story to scare kids until that night, because I couldn't shake the feeling that even now, after hours inside Claire's brightly lit living room, something was still outside, watching. I kept looking toward the windows, feeling those cold, glassy eyes piercing right through me. That summer, the Watcher showed up again to others in town. A neighbor saw him standing in their driveway, motionless, before vanishing when she flicked the porch light on. Another friend had the same feeling of being followed home, only to find deep scratch marks on his arm the next morning. I never saw him again, but sometimes when I walk alone on summer nights, I feel that same chill, that same weight of unseen eyes boring into the back of my neck. And I always make sure the porch light is on. Story. The end. It was late July in a small town just outside Cincinnati, Ohio, the kind of town where summer nights stretched long and humid, and everyone knew each other by name. The kind of town where the only real excitement was the annual county fair or the occasional high school football game. That summer, the air was thick with humidity, and the cicadas droned like a steady heartbeat, pulsing through the sticky night. I was 21 at the time, home from college for the summer, working the graveyard shift at a gas station on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills and kept me out of my parents' hair. The gas station was one of those old-school places. Bright fluorescent lights, shelves stocked with snacks and cigarettes, and a small parking lot that looked out onto a stretch of empty road bordered by dense woods. Most nights were quiet, the kind where you'd hear crickets chirp, the occasional car passing by, and the soft hum of the neon signs outside. But one Friday night in early August changed everything. I was nearing the end of my shift, just a couple of hours left until dawn, when a man walked in. I remember him because he looked out of place. He was tall, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with sun-weathered skin and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were dusty, like he'd been traveling for days. What stuck out the most was how quiet he was. He didn't say a word when he walked up to the counter, just stared at me with sharp, unsettling eyes. I greeted him, asked if he wanted anything, but he just pointed to the pack of cigarettes on the shelf behind me. I grabbed them, rang him up, and he paid with crumpled bills, never breaking eye contact. When he turned to leave, I noticed he didn't take a bag or look at the snacks, just walked straight out into the night without another word. That should have been the end of it. But something about him made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. About an hour later, I was restocking the soda fridge when I glanced out the window and saw his figure standing just beyond the edge of the parking lot, near the tree line. He wasn't moving, just watching. The parking lot lights flickered above him, casting long shadows across his face. I told myself it was probably some guy who lost his way, or maybe he was waiting for a ride. But a cold shiver ran through me. I locked the door and turned off the outdoor lights, hoping he'd disappear. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence, though I kept catching glimpses of movement outside, shadows flitting between the trees, the faint crunch of leaves underfoot. When my replacement arrived at 6 a.m., I was more than ready to leave. I got into my car and started driving home along that same stretch of road. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. I turned onto a narrow road that cut through a small patch of woods, the trees arching overhead like a tunnel. That's when I saw him again. Standing at the side of the road, the same man, hat pulled low, face turned toward me. He didn't move as I slowed down, just stood there, perfectly still. The air suddenly felt thick and my heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to drive past, to speed away, but the truck sputtered and died. The engine cut out without warning, leaving me sitting in complete silence except for the pounding of my own breath. I tried turning the key again. Nothing. I glanced back at him. He took a step forward, then another, slowly approaching the front of my truck. His face was pale now, almost ghostly in the early morning light, and his eyes, those same cold, empty eyes, locked on mine. I reached for my phone, but it was dead. I had forgotten to charge it overnight. Panic surged through me as the man came closer, his footsteps soft but deliberate on the gravel. Just then, the engine roared back to life. I slammed my foot on the gas, peeling away from the roadside and never looking back until I pulled in my driveway. I didn't tell anyone about that night, not really. They'd probably think I was crazy. But I kept seeing him in my dreams, the man in the dusty hat with the empty eyes who came out of the woods to watch me. That summer, the nights never felt safe again. Story the end. I grew up in a small town in northern Pennsylvania, where summer nights were slow, warm, and mostly uneventful. Everyone knew everyone else, and there wasn't much to do after dark except sit on the porch, catch fireflies, or tell stories about old ghost legends around the campfire. I never really believed those stories until the summer after I graduated high school, the summer before I left for college. That's when something happened to me. Something I can't explain, and that still haunts me every time summer rolls around. My best friend Jake and I decided to spend one last summer hanging out at our favorite spot, a small abandoned cabin deep in the woods just outside of town. The place was maybe 2 miles from the nearest house, surrounded by thick trees and a creek that ran just behind it. The cabin had been empty for years. We figured it was safe enough to use for a few nights, just camping out, telling stories, and maybe having a little fun. It was the kind of place teenagers in small towns dream about, isolated, quiet, perfect for forgetting about everything. We packed our stuff, sleeping bags, snacks, a cooler with some beer, a lantern, and a couple flashlights, and set out late afternoon on a Saturday in mid-July. The heat was still intense, but as the sun dropped, the woods cooled off a little, and a soft breeze stirred the leaves. We took our time getting to the cabin, stopping a few times along the way to look at the creek and skip stones. When we got there, the place looked like it had been untouched for years. Broken windows, vines crawling up the sides, and an old wooden porch that creaked with every step. That first night was nothing special. We built a fire in the rusted-out fire pit, drank some beers, and told stupid stories about school and girls. Around midnight, we decided to turn in, but neither of us slept well. The woods were alive with sounds, owls hooting, bugs buzzing, the distant howl of coyotes. But there was something else, something subtle and strange that I didn't notice until later. A kind of low, almost rhythmic tapping, like someone lightly knocking on wood. We joked it was the ghost of the cabin's original owner, but I didn't feel funny. The next day was hot, and we spent most of it swimming in the creek and relaxing. Jake wanted to explore the deeper woods, and I agreed, even though I didn't like how quiet it was away from the water. The trees grew thicker, the shadows darker, and after a while the tapping came again, soft, slow, steady. We both heard it, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We stopped and looked around, but there was nothing there. No animals, no people, just trees and silence. That night, the tapping returned. Louder this time, around 10 o'clock. We had a small radio playing some classic rock, but the tapping cut through everything like a warning. It was coming from the back wall of the cabin, right behind where we had our sleeping bags laid out. I told Jake to check it out, but he just shrugged and said it was probably a branch hitting the wood in the wind. Still, I felt uneasy. At around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something scraping against the outside of the cabin. Slow, deliberate, like claws dragging over wood. I nudged Jake, but he was out cold. I grabbed my flashlight and crept outside, shining the beam around. Nothing. The woods looked calm, bathed in moonlight, but I saw something that made my blood run cold. Deep scratch marks gouged into the side of the cabin, fresh and raw. They looked like they had been made by some kind of animal, or worse. I felt eyes on me, but when I looked up, nothing was there. Just the black trees and a faint breeze. I went back inside, heart pounding, and locked the door. Jake still didn't wake up. I stayed awake, sitting next to him with the flashlight in my hand, watching the window. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. A soft whisper, almost too quiet to catch. It sounded like someone calling my name, low and hollow. I shook Jake awake, telling him to listen, but he thought I was joking. I wasn't. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, but it was always just at the edge of hearing, impossible to make out clearly. Suddenly, the lantern on the table flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. We scrambled to find the matches, but before I could strike one, the whispering stopped, replaced by a low growl from outside. Something heavy was moving in the bushes, right next to the cabin. I grabbed Jake's arm, and we bolted out the door into the night, running blindly through the trees, not stopping until we reached the main road 2 miles away. We didn't look back. When we told people about it, no one believed us. They said it was probably a bear or our imagination. But I knew what I heard. The tapping, the whispers, the growl. Something had been there with us in those woods, watching us, and it didn't want us there. Even now, years later, I can still hear the tapping in my mind when summer nights get hot and quiet. And sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I hear my name whispered just outside my window. Story the end. It was one of those hot, humid summer nights in a small town in Ohio, the kind that made you sweat even when the sun had long disappeared behind the horizon. The air was thick and still, heavy with the smell of freshly cut grass and distant barbecues. I was 17 then, home from college for the summer, and itching to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' house. My friends and I had plans to meet up later that night, but before that, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. Our town wasn't big, mostly quiet streets lined with old maple trees and modest houses. By this time of night, most people were inside, windows shut tight to keep out the relentless summer heat. I slipped out through the back door, careful not to wake my parents. The porch light flickered weakly above me, casting long shadows on the cracked concrete steps. I pulled my phone out, looking for a signal. Nothing but dead zones on the edge of town. I figured I'd just walk down to the old creek trail, a place I used to go with friends when I was younger. It was peaceful there, shaded by thick trees, and far enough from the streetlights that you could see the stars better. The trail was maybe a mile from my house, and I was halfway there when I heard it, the faint crunching of leaves behind me. I stopped and listened. The night was otherwise silent except for the distant hum of cicadas. My heart picked up. I told myself it was just a raccoon or maybe a stray dog. But the footsteps continued, steady and slow, matching my pace. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing but the dark silhouettes of trees. I tried to speed up, but so did the footsteps. Panic started to rise. The streetlights were sparse here, and the shadows deepened with every step I took. I pulled my phone out again, but it still showed no signal. The battery was low, too. Turning onto the creek trail, I hoped to lose whoever or whatever was behind me. The path was narrow and flanked by thick underbrush. The moon was hidden behind clouds, so visibility was poor. The footsteps faded momentarily, then reappeared, closer than before. I heard a faint breathing, uneven and ragged. I broke into a run, branches scraping my arms and face. The trail twisted sharply ahead, and I thought I could finally lose the noise behind me. But then, right in front of me, a figure stepped out from the trees. At first, I thought it was a friend playing a joke, but the figure didn't move or speak. It was tall and thin, wearing tattered clothes that looked soaked through. Its head was tilted slightly to one side, and its eyes, pale and unblinking, reflected what little moonlight there was. My blood ran cold. I stopped, unable to move. The figure took a step forward. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused. The thing's breath was visible in the humid air, heavy and cold, like it didn't belong here in the summer heat. Suddenly, a low, guttural sound escaped its mouth. It wasn't a word, just a harsh noise that rattled in my chest. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root. The figure advanced, slow but relentless. I scrambled to my feet and bolted. Branches whipped past me, and I heard the figure crashing through the undergrowth behind me. The trail seemed endless as I ran blindly, lungs burning, heart pounding in my ears. I thought I saw a break in the trees ahead, a shortcut back to the neighborhood. I burst through the brush and onto a small dirt road. Relief washed over me when I saw a house with its porch light on. I sprinted to the door, pounding on it with trembling hands. The door swung open, revealing Mrs. Clark, my elderly next-door neighbor. Her eyes widened at my appearance, scratched, breathless, and wide-eyed. "Please let me in," I gasped. She nodded without hesitation, ushering me inside and locking the door behind me. I tried to explain what I saw, but my voice was shaky. Mrs. Clark listened silently, then closed all the blinds and turned on every light in the house. She handed me a glass of water. "I know what you saw," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "That thing's been around here before. Years ago, my grandson disappeared near that creek trail. They never found him. People say the thing lures you out, makes you follow it until you're lost." I shivered, staring at the window, half expecting to see those pale eyes staring back at me. "That's why I keep my porch light on every night," she continued. "It's supposed to keep it away." The rest of the night passed in restless unease. I didn't dare go back home until morning, and even then I avoided the creek trail. Friends thought I was exaggerating or that I'd imagined the whole thing, but I haven't been the same since that night. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I can hear slow footsteps behind me, matching my pace, just beyond the edge of the light. Story the end. The summer nights in my hometown of Cedarville, Ohio were always hot and sticky, the kind that make you sweat through your sheets, no matter how many fans you have running. The kind of night where the air feels thick enough to hold you down, and even the crickets sound like they're too tired to chirp. That particular July night still sticks with me, not because of anything wild or adventurous, but because of how quickly something ordinary turned utterly terrifying. I was 18 at the time, just graduated high school, and the kind of restless that comes with summer freedom. My friends and I didn't have much to do except hang out around town, drive aimlessly, or head to the lake to cool off. That night, me and my buddy Jake had decided to take his truck out to the edge of town, near the old Miller farm. The Miller place was abandoned, left to rot after Mr. Miller died a few years prior, and everyone in town told stories about it being haunted. Perfect spot for some dumb summer fun. We drove down the gravel road leading to the farm, windows down, the night air barely moving. There wasn't a soul around, just the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional owl hoot. Jake was telling some story about how the place was cursed, how people who went in never came out the same, but I was half listening, too distracted by the eerie quiet and the way the moonlight made the dead corn stalks look like ghostly figures swaying in the breeze. When we pulled up next to the crumbling farmhouse, the truck's headlights lit up broken windows and sagging porches. I could smell the old wood and damp earth mixing together, the smell of decay and abandonment. We climbed out, flashlights in hand, stepping carefully over rusted metal and fallen beams. Jake pushed open the creaky front door. It groaned like it hadn't been opened in decades. Inside, the house was darker than I expected. The air was stale, with a faint hint of something else, something sharp and metallic. Dust floated in the flashlight beams, and the floorboards creaked beneath our feet. Old furniture sat draped in sheets, and peeling wallpaper hung from the walls like tattered skin. We moved cautiously through the rooms, whispering jokes to break the silence. I was feeling more uneasy with every step, but didn't want to admit it. Then, from upstairs, we heard it, Slow, deliberate footsteps, heavy and dragging. We froze. The house was supposed to be empty. Jake shined his light toward the staircase, but the shadows swallowed it whole. Probably just a raccoon or something, he said, voice a little shaky. But then the footsteps stopped. The silence pressed in even heavier, and that's when I noticed the front door. It was shut tight when we came in. Now it was slightly ajar. We looked at each other, and without a word, the sense of panic kicked in. We turned to leave, and that's when we heard it again. A low, guttural whisper coming from the darkness upstairs. It was barely audible, but unmistakably human. Jake grabbed my arm. We're not alone here. We sprinted for the door, stumbling over debris. As we hit the porch, the door slammed shut behind us with a force that shook the whole house. We didn't look back until we were sitting in the truck, engine roaring, tires throwing gravel as we sped away. For weeks after, neither of us spoke about that night. But sometimes late at night, I'd hear that whisper in my mind, low, chilling, and impossible to ignore. Story the end. The summer of 2012 was one of those sticky, relentless stretches of heat that seemed to soak into everything. The pavement, the trees, even the inside of your skin. I was 22, working at a little hardware store in a small town in southern Ohio, a place where nothing ever happened except the occasional 4th of July fireworks, and maybe the county fair if you were lucky. But that summer, something happened. Something that stuck with me ever since, and I still get chills thinking about it on nights like this. I had just finished my shift on a Friday night, the sun long gone, but the air still thick and humid. My coworkers and I had been talking about going down to the river to cool off, and I agreed to meet them after closing. The river wasn't far from town, a little stretch of the Scioto River that was popular for swimming and fishing. Not exactly a big place, but it was quiet, shaded by old trees, and perfect for a late-night hangout. When I got there, my 3 friends were already there, sitting on some big flat rocks near the water. There was Ryan, who was always trying to act tough but was a big softy underneath. Lisa, who had a sharp wit and a laugh that made everything feel lighter. And Mike, the oldest of the group, always calm and quiet but reliable. We tossed our stuff down, peeled off our shirts, and jumped in. The water was cooler than I expected, and for a few minutes it felt like the kind of perfect summer night you want to bottle up and save forever. The sky was clear, full of stars, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of the river and the occasional cicada buzzing in the trees. We started joking around, splashing each other, talking about nothing in particular. Then Lisa said she wanted to explore a bit upstream, where there was an old, abandoned cabin nobody went to anymore. The place was maybe a quarter-mile away, hidden back in the trees and mostly forgotten. It used to belong to some old guy who died decades ago, and there were stories about how weird things happened there. Ryan shrugged but agreed to come along, and Mike and I stayed behind, watching the water. Lisa was always the brave one, the kind who'd disappear into the woods for fun and drag everyone else along. We waited about 20 minutes before Lisa and Ryan came back, dripping wet and out of breath. Lisa was laughing but looked a little pale. She told us the cabin was even creepier than she remembered. Windows smashed out, paint peeling, and inside she swore she heard a faint noise, like whispering. She thought it was the wind, but said it gave her goosebumps. Mike shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We stayed by the water for another hour, talking and teasing each other. Then Mike said he wanted to swim across the river, from where we were to a small island in the middle. It wasn't far, maybe 40 yards, but the water was dark and deep. I told him he was crazy, but he just smiled and jumped in. We watched as he swam, his figure cutting through the water, the moonlight glinting on the ripples. When he reached the island, he waved and called back for us to come over. Lisa and Ryan decided to go next, and I followed last. As I swam, I noticed the water felt colder than before, unnaturally so, and the current seemed to tug at me more than it should have. When I got to the island, I climbed out onto the rocky shore, breathing hard. We all sat down, drying off, the mood quieter now. That's when the first sound hit me, a faint, low groaning coming from the trees. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer caught in the underbrush. But the sound was too deliberate, too close. Lisa's face went pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. We all listened. The groaning grew louder, mixed with a wet, dragging sound like something heavy moving through the undergrowth. Ryan stood up, shining his flashlight toward the edge of the island. The beam caught nothing but shadows and swaying branches. "Probably just an animal," he said, but his voice was shaky. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, heavy steps, crunching leaves and snapping twigs, coming closer. Mike grabbed a long stick from the ground and held it out in front of him, his knuckles white. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the trees, just out of sight. Lisa's voice cracked as she said, "Who's there? Show yourself." Silence. Then, without warning, the water near the island erupted in a splash, like someone had jumped in. We all jumped to our feet, shining our flashlights around wildly. Nothing. We called out again, our voices trembling. The moonlight flickered through the leaves as a breeze stirred, but no one answered. We decided it was time to leave. We climbed back into the river, swimming side by side, eyes darting to the shoreline. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the island, just at the tree line. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and its head seemed too large for its body, tilted at a strange angle. It didn't move, just stared at us with empty black eyes that reflected the flashlight beams like dark mirrors. I froze mid-stroke, heart pounding. Mike yelled, "Swim faster!" We all pushed forward with everything we had, the cold water biting at our lungs, the current trying to pull us under. When we reached the far bank, we scrambled out, gasping for air, and ran into the trees, not looking back until we hit the main road. That night, none of us spoke about what we'd seen. We tried to tell ourselves it was a trick of the light, a shadow, or a bad reaction to the cold water. But every summer after that, when the heat settles and the night is still, I swear I can hear those heavy footsteps again, and sometimes the faint splash of something moving just beneath the surface. I never went back to that river, and I don't know what we saw that night. But I'll tell you this. Sometimes, when you think you're alone on a summer night, you really aren't. Story the end. It was a hot, sticky summer night in a small town in Ohio. The kind of night where the heat lingers in the air, refusing to let you breathe easy, even after the sun has dipped below the horizon. I was 17, home from school for the summer, working a late shift at the local convenience store, a small, rundown place on the edge of town that barely saw much traffic past midnight. That night, I was closing alone, which wasn't unusual for the summer. My boss trusted me enough, and the town was so quiet that he figured nothing much ever happened after dark. I didn't mind. It was easy money, and sometimes I liked the silence that came with the late hours. Around 11:45 p.m., just before I was about to lock the front doors, a car pulled up. It was old and beat up, the kind of rusted-out sedan you'd expect to see in a junkyard, but it was still running. The driver was a man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a pale face that looked almost ghostly in the dim streetlight. He had thin, stringy hair and deep-set eyes that never quite met mine when I looked at him. He walked in slowly, his movements jerky, like he was trying to control something inside himself. He didn't say hello or ask how I was. Instead, he just stood at the counter and stared, his eyes flickering to the rows of snacks behind me. I remember feeling this sudden chill, which was odd because the air conditioning was blasting. The hairs on my arms stood up and my gut told me to be wary. I tried to stay calm, forced a polite smile, and asked if he needed anything. "I'm just looking," he said quietly. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't spoken in a while. That's when I noticed his hands, pale, veiny, but with long, dirty fingernails that looked like they hadn't been clipped in months. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. He placed it on the counter, and my curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up carefully. It was a faded picture of a young woman, maybe in her 20s. She was smiling, standing in front of a house that looked like it could have been the old farmhouse out on the edge of town. There was something haunting about her eyes, almost like they were warning me. "Do you know her?" I asked, handing the photo back. The man's eyes darkened. "She's my daughter," he whispered. "She disappeared last summer." My heart skipped a beat. I'd heard rumors about a young woman who vanished from around here, but no one ever said much out loud. The police had found no leads, and the case had gone cold. "I've been looking for her," he said, voice cracking. "And I think she might still be out there." I wanted to say something comforting, but the words caught in my throat. He stayed for a few more minutes, looking around the store like searching for something invisible. Then, without another word, he left. I locked the doors behind him and stood there for a moment, staring out into the dark street. After he left, strange things started happening at the store. Lights flickered on and off, the door would sometimes lock and unlock by itself, and the old radio in the back would play static for no reason. At first, I thought it was just the building's wiring, but the timing was too perfect. One night, as I was closing up, I heard footsteps behind the counter. I spun around, but no one was there. The feeling of being watched overwhelmed me, and I bolted to the back door, locking it tightly behind me. Over the next few weeks, my nightmares got worse. I dreamt of that woman from the photograph, wandering lost through dense woods, calling out for help but never being heard. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of someone whispering my name. One particularly hot night, a week after the man had come in, I was finishing my shift when I heard a faint tapping on the window near the register. I looked up slowly, heart pounding, and saw a pale hand pressed against the glass. I yelped and stumbled back. The hand vanished when I blinked. I called my parents, begging them to come get me, but they lived an hour away. I told my boss, who brushed it off and told me to quit imagining things. The last straw came when I found a message scrawled on the fogged-up glass door as I was locking up one night. It said simply, "She's here." I never stayed to find out what that meant. I quit the job the next day, and my parents moved me to stay with my aunt in the city for the rest of the summer. Years later, I found out the woman's body was discovered buried in the woods behind that old farmhouse. The man who came to the store was arrested for her disappearance. The whole town whispered about the strange things people saw around the property. Ghostly figures, whispers in the night, and lights flickering in abandoned windows. I never went back to that town, but sometimes on hot summer nights, I swear I can still hear footsteps tapping on my window. And I remember the look in that man's eyes, the desperate hope of someone haunted by a secret that refused to rest. Story the end. It was one of those oppressively hot summer nights in a small town in the Midwest. Air so thick with humidity it felt like you were breathing through a wet cloth. The kind of night where even the cicadas had gone silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I was about 22 at the time, home for the summer after my sophomore year in college. My friends and I were used to hanging out late, driving around aimlessly to escape the suffocating heat trapped inside our cramped houses. That night, it was just me and my two closest friends, Mark and Lila. We decided to take a drive out toward the county park, a place we used to go camping as kids, but now at night had an entirely different vibe. Dark, dense woods surrounded a small lake, and on nights like this, it always felt like something unseen was lurking just beyond the edge of the flashlight's beam. We hopped into Mark's old pickup truck, windows down to catch whatever breeze we could. The radio was playing static and old country songs, barely audible over the buzz of the engine. As we rolled past familiar streets, the town seemed empty. Porches dark, no kids running around, just the occasional flicker of a porch light. Our plan was simple. Find a spot near the water, crack open a couple of beers, and just talk for a while. No phones, no distractions, just us and the night. When we got to the park entrance, the gate was open, which was odd because it was supposed to close at dusk. But the road was empty, and we shrugged it off as a mistake or someone leaving late. We drove in, headlights slicing through the blackness. The park was quieter than usual, almost unnerving. The usual chorus of frogs and insects was absent. The only sound was our tires crunching gravel. We parked near the lake, the surface smooth and black, reflecting nothing but our dim headlights. We climbed out, the heat pressing down on us still, but the air was different here, cooler but not comforting. Mark pulled a couple of beers from a cooler, and we sat on the tailgate letting the silence stretch. Then Lila spoke up, voice low. "You ever get the feeling you're being watched? Like not just by animals or whatever, but something else?" I nodded, feeling it too. The woods around us seemed too still, like holding a secret. Suddenly, a faint rustling came from the tree line. We all froze, eyes scanning the darkness. Mark flicked his flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. The rustling stopped, but then it began again, closer this time. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't the scampering of an animal, it was heavier, like someone dragging their feet. Maybe some drunk kid, Mark said, but even he sounded unsure. We decided to pack up and leave, but as we turned toward the truck, something made me stop. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper floated on the breeze, words I couldn't make out, but definitely human. I pointed toward the edge of the trees. Did you hear that? Lila's eyes widened. Yeah. Let's go. We hurried to the truck, doors slamming shut behind us. Mark started the engine, but the truck hesitated, sputtered. The radio crackled violently, then cut out completely. The whispering came again, closer, more urgent, like a warning or a call. Mark yanked the gear shift, and the truck lurched forward. Headlights caught movement at the tree line. A figure, pale and thin, standing motionless just beyond the edge. We screamed and sped away, hearts pounding. For the next several miles, the figure stayed just at the edge of the road, always there, watching, until finally it vanished. We didn't speak much on the way back. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch, the night still hot and heavy, wondering what we had seen. Years later, I learned about a missing man, disappeared in those woods around that same time. The descriptions matched the figure we saw perfectly. No trace was ever found. Sometimes late at night, I still hear that whisper on the wind calling from the woods. Story, the end. The summer night in northern Michigan was unbearably warm, the kind where the air feels thick enough to choke you, and even the slightest movement leaves you drenched in sweat. I was 20, home from college for the summer, and working at a small bait and tackle shop near the lake. The town was tiny, the sort of place that shut down by 9 p.m. and everyone knew everyone else's business. But that night, something happened that broke the usual quiet, something I still can't fully explain. It was a Friday, and I was closing up shop later than usual, around 11:30 p.m. The store was on the edge of town, right where the dense woods began to creep toward the water. Usually, by that time, the only sounds were crickets and frogs, but that night I noticed a faint rhythmic tapping coming from just outside the back door. At first, I thought it was a branch rubbing against the building in the wind, but the air was still. The tapping was deliberate, slow, like someone knocking, but too soft to be confident. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam cut through the thick darkness of the trees. I called out, "Hello?" But the only reply was that tapping, echoing again from the woods about 20 feet away. I started toward the noise, feeling uneasy but unable to turn back. The moon was a thin crescent, barely lighting the way, and the smell of damp earth and pine filled my nostrils. As I walked deeper into the shadows, the tapping stopped abruptly. I shone my flashlight around. There was nothing, no branches, no animals, just silence and the heavy stillness of the night. I was about to turn back when I noticed something on the ground. At first I thought it was a stick, but it was too straight, too smooth. I picked it up, an old, rusty key. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to take it with me. I slipped it into my pocket and hurried back to the shop, locking the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the tapping returning, louder, closer. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, this time from my bedroom window. Slow, rhythmic tapping. I stared at the window, frozen, watching shadows shift just beyond the glass. The tapping stopped, and a cold breeze swept through the room, despite the window being shut tight. The next day, I asked around town about the woods behind the shop. The locals told me old legends about the land, stories of a man who'd vanished there years ago, said to haunt the trees, knocking on doors for help no one would give. I never went back into those woods after dark. But sometimes, on summer nights, I still hear that tapping, soft and steady, like a ghost waiting to be let in. Story, the end. The summer night was one of those sticky, slow evenings that seemed to stretch on forever in the small town of Pine Ridge, somewhere deep in the American Midwest. It was late July, around 11 p.m., and the air felt heavy with humidity, the kind that makes you sweat even when you're sitting perfectly still. The sky was clear, sprinkled with stars, and the faint buzz of cicadas filled the warm night. The streets were empty except for the occasional car passing by, and the whole town seemed to be holding its breath under the quiet moonlight. I was 17, just finishing my junior year of high school, and hanging out with two of my best friends, Rachel and Tyler. We'd spent the evening at a friend's barbecue, But by the time the fire died down and the party started to wind, we were itching to get out and do something else. Anything to shake off the boredom of small town life. Rachel's parents were out of town, so she'd invited us over to her house, a modest two-story on the edge of town near the woods. The neighborhood was quiet and safe, or so we thought. By the time we got to Rachel's place, it was just past midnight. The three of us sat on her porch swing with iced sodas, watching the streetlights flicker in the heat. Tyler had brought his guitar, and after a few lazy chords, we drifted into a comfortable silence. The kind of silence where everything's peaceful, Yet something just feels a little off. Rachel's house backed up to a stretch of woods called Miller's Hollow, a dense patch of old oak and maple trees that stretched for miles and held all the usual summer night sounds: owls hooting, frogs croaking, leaves rustling in the breeze. But that night, the woods were strangely still. No sound but an occasional snap of a twig, like something was moving just out of sight. Rachel shivered, pulling her hoodie tighter around her shoulders. "I don't like how quiet it is tonight," she said softly. Tyler laughed. "It's just the heat messing with you. This is what summer sounds like." I nodded, but my eyes kept flicking to the tree line. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Suddenly, Tyler stopped playing and frowned. "Did you guys hear that?" We all listened. At first, there was nothing but the usual nighttime sounds. Then came a faint noise, something like footsteps, but not on the pavement. Crunching leaves, slow and deliberate, coming from the edge of the woods behind Rachel's yard. "Probably just some kid walking home," Rachel said, but her voice wasn't steady. Tyler got up and shone his phone flashlight toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the underbrush, but nothing moved. The footsteps stopped. Minutes passed. We tried to laugh it off, but the unease stayed with us. Then came a soft tapping on the back door. We froze. Rachel's back door was old and rarely used. Nobody should have been outside. Tyler moved toward the door, flashlight in hand. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. He opened the door slowly. The porch light flooded the backyard, but there was no one there. Then, from the woods came a low, guttural growl. We all screamed, rushing inside and locking the door behind us. Rachel's phone had no signal. We were trapped. The growling grew louder, mixed with a strange, wet slapping sound. Then, outside the window, a pale, gaunt face appeared. Its eyes were sunken and glowing faintly. Its mouth pulled back in a twisted grin. We slammed the curtains shut, hearts pounding. For hours, we sat huddled in the living room, the noises circling the house relentless. When dawn finally broke, the sounds stopped. We never found out what it was. But every summer since, on nights like that, thick, still, full of shadows, I remember the face in the window and the terror of knowing something dark watches, waiting just beyond the light. Story the end. It was the kind of summer night that wraps you in heat, where even the darkness feels heavy and sticky, the cicadas buzzing nonstop like static on a radio. I was 19, home from college for the summer, living with my parents in this small town in Ohio that I'd always thought was safe. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where your biggest worry was who'd win the local softball league or whether the ice cream truck would come by before sunset. But that summer night changed all that for me. I'd been out with a few friends, nothing wild, just hanging around the park near the edge of town, shooting the breeze, throwing a football back and forth. The sun had long set, and the park's big oak trees cast deep shadows across the grass. We were there late, well past the time most people would call it quits and head home. It was just the three of us, me, Mike, and Sarah. We were joking, talking about the usual stuff, when Mike mentioned something weird. Have you ever noticed that old Miller place down by the creek? The one everyone says is haunted?" he said, nodding toward the dark woods on the other side of the park. Sarah rolled her eyes. "You mean that rundown shack? It's just an old barn." "Yeah, but people say there's been weird stuff there for years. Lights, strange sounds at night," Mike said, voice low. "Like someone or something is watching." I laughed it off. Ghost stories weren't my thing, but Mike looked serious, like he'd heard something himself. The three of us decided to check it out. It wasn't far, just a quick walk through the woods behind the park. The trees were thick, and the air smelled damp and musty. The only sounds were the bugs and our footsteps crunching on dry leaves. It was one of those nights where the darkness feels almost alive, like it's pressing in on you. As we got closer, I could see the outline of the old barn, a skeletal frame of wood with peeling paint and broken windows. It sat right next to the creek, which was a slow, lazy trickle, reflecting the moonlight in little ripples. The place had that abandoned feel, no signs of life, just the whisper of the wind through the broken boards. Mike pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam caught something moving just at the edge of the barn. I squinted, heart picking up pace. There was a figure standing there, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a dark coat or jacket, but it was too shadowy to tell. The figure didn't move or speak, just stood staring straight at us. "Who's there?" Mike called out, voice shaking slightly. No answer. The figure stayed still, unmoving. "Probably just some homeless guy," Sarah whispered. I wasn't so sure. There was something wrong about the way that figure held itself, too rigid, too unnatural, like a scarecrow frozen in place. Then the figure raised its arms slowly, pointing toward the woods behind us. We all turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just more trees, thick and black. Suddenly, the air grew colder. The cicadas stopped buzzing altogether, and the woods fell into an eerie silence. Mike swallowed hard. Maybe we should go. We started walking back, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Every shadow seemed alive, every crackle in the brush a warning. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that figure following us, but the path was empty. Then, out of nowhere, a scream pierced the night. High-pitched, desperate, echoing through the trees. We all froze. It sounded like Sarah's voice, but distorted and far away. She started running, and I followed. Mike was right behind us, but something about the darkness was messing with my head. The trees looked closer together, the path twisting where it hadn't before. We broke through the last line of trees and burst onto the main road. The streetlights were flickering, casting long shadows. Sarah was crying, clutching her arm. She said something about feeling grabbed, but when we looked, there was no scratch, no mark. Just the wetness of her tears. We decided to call it a night and head back to my place. On the walk home, I felt a cold presence lingering behind us, something unseen but close. The next day, I tried to shrug it off, but the whole town felt different. People whispered about strange things, missing pets, odd lights near the creek, unsettling noises in the night. That summer, I stopped going out after dark. The barn by the creek remained untouched. But sometimes when I passed by, I swear I'd catch a glimpse of that figure, standing silently, watching. It wasn't until years later that I found out about the Miller family tragedy. Their daughter had disappeared near that barn decades ago, never found. Since then, people have reported seeing a shadowy figure pointing toward the woods, warning or maybe inviting. I don't know. All I know is that summer night changed how I see the dark. Some places aren't just abandoned, they're waiting for someone to see, to listen, or maybe to never leave. Story the end. The summer of 2016 was one I'll never forget, not because of anything extraordinary or grand, but because of how something ordinary turned into the most unsettling night of my life. I was 24, living in a small town in Missouri, not far from St. Louis. Summers there were hot and sticky, the kind of nights where the air doesn't cool down and the hum of cicadas fills the darkness. That summer, I was working as a night security guard at a small warehouse on the outskirts of town. The job was mostly boring. Check the perimeter, patrol the lot, make sure the doors were locked. I'd listen to music through my headphones and count the minutes until dawn. The warehouse sat near an old railroad track, and behind it stretched a dense patch of woods. The only streetlights were near the entrance, so most of the lot was cast in shadows, especially on those moonless nights when the sky was just black. One Friday night, around 11 p.m., I was doing my usual rounds. The radio was playing quietly, and the air was thick with humidity. I was halfway through my second lap when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on gravel coming from the far end of the lot near the woods. It was strange because the place was supposed to be empty except for me. I stopped and took off my headphones, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they seemed to be circling the warehouse, always just out of my direct sight. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" But got no answer. My voice sounded small and swallowed by the night. I decided to investigate, walking cautiously toward the sound, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating empty crates and old machinery. But no one was there. Just as I was about to turn back, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark figure slipping between the trees lining the property. Hey! But the figure disappeared into the woods. My heart was pounding now. I wanted to call it in, but I wasn't sure if it was someone trespassing or just an animal. Still, I felt exposed out there, alone. I went back to the office building, locked the door, and sat by the window, watching the edge of the woods. About 15 minutes later, I heard the footsteps again, this time closer, coming from the direction of the loading docks. I looked out and saw a man standing near the dumpsters, half hidden in shadows. He wore a dark hoodie, but the way he stood, motionless, rigid, gave me an eerie feeling. I grabbed the phone and dialed my supervisor. As I was about to tell him what I saw, the figure suddenly turned his head toward the window, and I froze. His face was pale in the dim light, and his eyes, I swear to God, were completely black. Not just dark, but like empty pits. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. When I looked again, the man was gone. I didn't hear footsteps retreating. Nothing. Just vanished. The rest of the night dragged on. I tried to keep my eyes on the windows, but the feeling of being watched never left me. When morning finally came, I handed in my keys and told my supervisor I was done. I never went back. Weeks later, I heard from a friend that there had been reports of a strange man lurking around the industrial park, creeping around warehouses and vanishing into the woods. No one ever caught him. Sometimes I wonder what that thing was, and if it's still out there waiting for the next summer night. Story the end. It was a late July evening in a small town in Kentucky, the kind of place where everybody knows your name and doors rarely stay locked. The summer heat had been relentless all day, leaving the streets shimmering with waves of sticky air. But as the sun slipped behind the hills, a cool breeze finally began to stir. The cicadas thrummed their constant buzzing soundtrack, and fireflies flickered like tiny lanterns through the thickening darkness. I was 19 at the time, home for the summer before heading off to college in the fall. My family's house sat on the edge of town, where the pavement faded into gravel and the woods grew wild and tangled. It was the perfect place to spend long summer nights outside, surrounded by trees and the quiet hum of crickets. My friends and I often gathered in the backyard, grilling, telling stories, and chasing the fireflies until our fingers were sticky with sweetness and our lungs full of summer air. That night, though, something felt off from the start. I'd just come back from hanging out with my friend Lisa and a couple others. We had been at her house near the old baseball fields, and I decided to take the longer route home, through the back roads and forest paths, just to feel the quiet and coolness of the evening. I rode my bike slowly, breathing in the scent of pine and wet earth, the warm breeze teasing my hair. But the woods seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper, as if they were swallowing the fading light. I passed the old Miller farm, an abandoned place we'd always dared each other to explore when we were kids. The fields there stretched wide, choked with weeds, and the rickety barn leaned crookedly, half hidden in the dark. As I pedaled past, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something standing just beyond the tree line, tall, still, watching. My heart jumped and I slowed down, squinting into the shadows. There was no shape, only darkness. I shook it off, telling myself it was just a trick of the fading light. But my skin was crawling as I pushed my bike faster down the gravel path toward home. Later that night, after dinner, I was sitting on the back porch with my younger brother, Jason. The sky was clear, the stars bright and sharp against the black velvet, and the air smelled of honeysuckle and cut grass. We were laughing about something silly when a sudden chill blew through the yard, as if someone had opened a door to a cold room. Then we heard it, a sharp tapping noise coming from the edge of the woods behind the house. Tap, 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 like someone knocking on the side of a tree. I frowned and looked over. Jason's face had gone pale. "What is that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. The tapping came again, slower this time, deliberate. It wasn't a woodpecker or any animal I knew. It sounded intentional. We both stood up and listened, our eyes darting toward the dark woods, where the trees swayed, but nothing moved. Then the tapping stopped. Minutes passed and silence settled back over the yard. "I'm going inside," Jason said quickly. I nodded and followed him through the screen door. As we shut it behind us, a low scraping noise scraped across the porch's wooden floorboards, slow and heavy like claws dragged along the wood. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Just the porch, bathed in the pale light from the kitchen window. Trying to shake the creeping unease, I locked all the doors and windows, and we sat in the living room with the TV on, the volume turned high enough to drown out the sounds outside. About an hour later, I noticed the power flicker, then go out completely. The entire house was plunged into darkness, save for the pale moonlight spilling in through the curtains. Jason reached for his phone, the only source of light now, but the screen was blank, no signal. Then, from the backyard, a voice whispered my name. Not a yell or a shout, but a low, breathy hiss that sent chills racing down my spine. My name. I froze, eyes wide, staring at the window. The voice was right outside. Close. Too close. Jason grabbed my arm, shaking me. Did you hear that? Before I could answer, there was a sudden crash at the back door, loud, sharp, as if something heavy had been thrown against the wood. We screamed and ran into the hallway, backing toward the front door. The voice whispered again, clearer this time. Come outside. No way, I whispered. Jason was crying, and I was shaking, trying to hold it together. Then the back door handle rattled violently, as if someone was trying to open it. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing a butcher knife from the block, and pressed myself against the wall near the front door. The rattling stopped. Silence again. But the tapping started back, this time on the windows. Tap, tap, tap. We huddled together, waiting for dawn. When morning came, my parents found us curled up on the couch, pale and exhausted. We checked the backyard, but there was no sign of anything unusual. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. A few weeks later, I learned that the Miller farm, the place I'd biked past a few nights earlier, had been the site of a mysterious disappearance decades ago. A young man vanished there one summer night, never found. Locals said his ghost haunted the woods, searching for something lost. I never went back to that part of town after dark. Every summer night, when the cicadas sing and the fireflies flicker, I remember the tapping, the whispers, and the feeling of eyes watching me from the shadows. I still don't know what was out there, but I know it was real. Story the end. The summer of my 18th year is a night I'll never forget. It was one of those oppressively hot July evenings in rural Kentucky, where the air is so thick with humidity it feels like you're breathing through a wet blanket. The kind of night when even the crickets and frogs fall silent, like the whole world is holding its breath. I was home from college for the summer, working the graveyard shift at a gas station about 10 miles outside my hometown. It was a slow night, no customers in sight, the kind that drags on, making your mind wander. About midnight, a couple of guys in a beat-up pickup truck pulled up, bought a couple of sodas, and left. That was it for the night, until just before 2 a.m., when the door jingled again. This time it was a young woman, probably around my age, standing just outside the door. She looked completely out of place, wearing jeans and a hoodie despite the heat, with damp hair and red eyes that seemed too tired to cry but still gleamed with fear. "Are you the only one here?" she asked, voice trembling. I told her yeah, just me. She hesitated, glancing down the dark highway that stretched behind the gas station into endless woods. "I need help," she said, barely above a whisper. "My car broke down a few miles back. Could you call someone? Please?" I nodded and grabbed the phone behind the counter, but when I tried to dial, the line was dead. No signal on my cell either. The highway was notorious for having no reception. She let out a shaky breath and said, "I can't stay out here. Can I wait inside for a bit?" I hesitated. Normally, I wouldn't let strangers hang around at this hour, but something about her terrified, desperate eyes made me agree. She sat down at one of the small tables, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. I tried to make small talk, but she barely responded, just staring out the window toward the empty road. Then she said something that stuck with me. "There's something out there," she whispered. "Something that's been following me for hours." I laughed nervously, thinking it was probably some drunk or a prank, but she shook her head. "No, I swear. I saw it in the woods. It's not human." Before I could ask her what she meant, the lights in the gas station flickered, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness except for the faint glow from the outside street lamp. The power failure wasn't unusual around here, but the timing was unsettling. I grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and turned it on, the beam shaking as I aimed it toward the door and windows. The woman stood up, her pale face illuminated, and said, "I think it's coming." At first, I thought she meant someone approaching the store. But when I looked outside, the road was empty, just the rustling trees and thick shadows. Then, from the woods came a low, guttural growl. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, deep, wet, and full of menace. The hair on my arms stood up. The woman's face drained of color. "I'm sorry," she said, backing away from the window. "You shouldn't have let me in." Before I could ask what she meant, a figure emerged from the tree line. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with long, twisted limbs. Its skin was slick and pale, like it had been soaked in water too long. The thing moved with jerky, broken motions, head tilted at an impossible angle. The flashlight flickered, and in that moment the figure darted toward the gas station, crashing through the front door with terrifying force. Glass shattered, and I stumbled back, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst from my chest. The woman screamed and grabbed my arm, dragging me behind the counter. The creature snarled, lunging toward us, knocking over shelves and sending cans rolling across the floor. I grabbed a metal rod from behind the counter and swung wildly. Somehow it connected, and the thing recoiled, its long claws scraping against the concrete floor. But it wasn't deterred. It howled, a sound like nails on glass mixed with something deep and primal. Then it stopped. The growling faded, replaced by silence so thick I could hear my own breathing. Suddenly, it turned and vanished as if it was swallowed by the shadows. The power flickered back on. The woman looked at me, eyes wide and frantic. "You have to leave," she said urgently. "It knows you're here now." Before I could say anything else, she ran out the back door and disappeared into the night. I stayed until dawn, locking all the doors and windows, afraid to even blink. When the sun finally rose, I called the police and told them what happened. They found nothing. No tracks, no damage beyond the broken glass, no sign of the woman or the creature. Years have passed, but I still live just outside that town. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I see something moving just beyond the tree line, tall and twisted, watching. And every summer night, when the air turns thick and heavy, I remember that night and wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone else. Story the end. The summer night was one of those thick, heavy ones where the heat sinks into your skin and the air barely moves. I was 19, home for the summer from college, working a late shift at a convenience store on the edge of a small Ohio town. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, and nights like this usually meant crickets, fireflies, and nothing out of the ordinary. That night started like most others. I was finishing up my shift around midnight when a couple of local kids came in to buy snacks and sodas. They were loud and joking, typical teenagers, and I half smiled, trying to stay awake. The store was dim, except for the flickering fluorescent lights, and outside, the summer night pressed against the glass windows like it wanted in. After they left, things got quiet again. I wiped down the counters and restocked some shelves, glancing occasionally at the parking lot. That's when I noticed something strange. A dark figure standing just beyond the edge of the lot, near the tree line that separated the store from the woods. At first, I thought it was one of the town drifters, or maybe a kid messing around, but something about the figure was wrong. It stood completely still, shoulders hunched, and didn't move when a car passed by with its headlights briefly illuminating the spot. The figure was just there, like a shadow fused to the darkness. I told myself to stop staring, probably just my eyes playing tricks in the low light. Still, every few minutes I'd catch a glimpse, always in the same spot. Around 12:30 a.m., the power flickered and the lights dimmed for a second. When they came back, the figure was gone. I breathed easier and finished my shift. As I locked up the store and stepped outside, the night air felt thicker, heavier somehow. The woods behind the store were dark and silent, which was unusual. Usually, you'd hear the rustling of animals or the chirp of insects. Walking to my car, I noticed footprints in the gravel. Wet, fresh footprints leading from the edge of the woods toward the store entrance. They were large, almost too large for any of the kids or drifters around here. My stomach churned. I got in the car and started the engine, planning to get home fast. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my headlights caught movement again. The same dark figure standing just at the tree line. This time, it stepped forward, slow and deliberate, just enough to be seen but never fully illuminated. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, and in the rearview mirror, I saw it disappear into the trees. I sped home that night and locked every door and window, but sleep didn't come. I kept hearing the sound of footsteps outside my house, the faint scrape of something dragging along the pavement. I didn't dare look. The next morning, I went back to the store hoping the whole thing was just a bad dream. But in the gravel, those huge footprints were still there, wet, deep, and leading nowhere. Weeks later, the store manager told me about another local who disappeared one summer night right near those same woods, leaving behind nothing but strange footprints and a feeling of dread. I never went near those woods again after that summer. Every time I hear a noise in the dark or see a shadow just beyond the light, I remember that night, the figure that shouldn't have been there, waiting silently on a summer night when the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Story the end. The summer of 2008 in rural Pennsylvania was one of those humid, thick nights where even the crickets seemed sluggish. I was 23, home from college for the break, spending my evenings helping out at my dad's farm or hanging out with a small group of friends who mostly lived nearby. There wasn't much to do in our town, but the one place everyone loved on nights like that was Miller's Hollow, a patch of woods bordering a shallow creek about a mile from town. We'd been going there since high school, mostly to drink, smoke, and escape the buzzkill of parents and neighbors. That Friday night, it was especially hot, the kind where even standing still felt like wading through soup. Around 10 p.m., 4 of us, me, my girlfriend Katie, my best friend Josh, and his cousin Laura, decided to head out to Miller's Hollow. We loaded some beers into Josh's old pickup, grabbed some flashlights, and drove out. The road to the hollow was a gravel path lined with thick pines that blocked out the moonlight, making it feel even darker than it was. When we got there, the creek was low, the banks muddy but cool. We found a flat clearing where some logs had been rolled into a makeshift bench and set our stuff down. Katie and Laura passed around a pack of cigarettes. Josh and I cracked open beers. We sat close enough to hear the creek's steady babble, but far enough away so the water didn't dampen us. The air was heavy and smelled like wet earth and pine needles. We talked about dumb stuff, summer plans, old memories, who was seeing who, and laughed a lot. But there was an undercurrent of something else, a kind of nervous excitement I think we all felt but didn't say out loud. Around midnight, Josh suggested we take a walk along the creek. Katie and Laura wanted to stay put, so it was just Josh and me. We grabbed our flashlights and headed downstream, stepping over roots and squeezing through thickets. The woods were quiet, except for the creek and our own footsteps crunching leaves. About a quarter mile in, Josh stopped and pointed at something in the water. "Look," he whispered. I shone my light toward the creek. In the shallow part near the bank was a pile of old rotten wood. Maybe a fallen tree, maybe someone's forgotten junk. But as I looked closer, I noticed what seemed like a boot sticking out from under the debris, a muddy, worn-out boot, half submerged and barely moving. "Is that?" I started. Josh nodded, swallowing hard. "Could be an animal, but..." His voice trailed off. We stepped closer. The boot was attached to a leg, or at least what looked like a leg, bent unnaturally at the knee. The water around it was dark and still. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. "Maybe we should call someone," I said quietly. Josh shook his head. "We can't. It's probably nothing. Maybe some hunters dumped something." He looked around nervously. "But we should get back." We turned back toward the clearing, but stopped when a low sound came from the woods, like a soft groan or a whisper carried on the wind. It was barely audible, but it chilled me instantly. "What was that?" I asked. Josh shined his flashlight into the trees, but saw nothing. "Probably an animal," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We hurried back, stepping over roots faster than before. The night seemed to close in around us, the dark deeper, the air thicker. When we reached the clearing, Katie and Laura were quiet, faces pale. Katie's eyes were wide, fixed on the shadows just beyond the logs. "What's wrong?" I asked. Katie shook her head. "I heard something," she whispered, "like someone crying." Laura nodded. "Me too. It sounded close, like right behind those trees." We all looked toward the dark woods lining the clearing. The night was still, but now every sound felt amplified. The rustle of leaves, a branch snapping in the distance, the creek's steady flow. Josh grabbed a stick from the ground and held it like a weapon. "All right, whoever's messing with us, show yourself." Nothing. Then suddenly, from the far side of the clearing, the part near the creek, we heard a loud splash, like a heavy body hitting water. We all jumped, shining our flashlights toward the creek bank. Nothing but blackness. "Let's get out of here," Laura said, voice trembling. As we packed up, the sounds didn't stop. Every now and then, a splash, a whisper, a rustle that wasn't a breeze. When Josh climbed into the truck, he noticed the tires were covered in mud, darker than the creek's normal soil, almost sticky. Driving back into town, the headlights caught movement on the roadside. A figure stood just at the tree line, tall and thin, barely moving, almost blending into the darkness. It looked at us with eyes that caught the light like coals. Josh slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, but when the figure didn't move and the trees behind it seemed to absorb it, he gunned the engine and sped away. The next day, the local police confirmed a missing person report for a young man who vanished in those woods weeks before. His body never found. The rumors about Miller's Hollow being haunted suddenly felt all too real. I never went back. Neither did the others. But some summer nights, when the heat makes the air heavy and still, I swear I can hear the creek splash and the soft cries from the woods, and I wonder if something there is still waiting. Story the end. It was late July in rural Georgia, and the heat of the day had finally faded into the sticky humidity of a summer night. I was 19 at the time, home for the summer before my sophomore year of college, and working a second job at a gas station on the outskirts of a tiny town. The kind of place where the nearest neighbor was a half-mile away, and the roads were lined with tall pines that whispered with every passing breeze. That night, I was closing alone. It was just after 11 p.m., and the town had quieted down hours before. I'd been wiping down the counters, restocking shelves, and counting the cash drawer, getting ready to lock up when the bell above the door jingled. I glanced up and saw a man walk in, a tall, lanky guy, mid-40s maybe, wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low, a plain t-shirt, and jeans that looked like they'd seen better days. His face was tan, but his eyes looked tired and wary, scanning the store as if he expected something to jump out. He didn't say a word at first, just shuffled to the drink cooler and grabbed a bottle of water. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, feeling a slight chill despite the summer heat. There was something off about him. The way his movements were too slow, deliberate, like he was trying not to draw attention. When he finally walked to the counter, I forced a polite smile. "Evening," I said. He nodded, then leaned in close enough that I caught the faint smell of sweat and something sour, like old leather or damp earth. "You know the woods behind the old Miller place?" he asked quietly. I blinked, surprised by the question. The Miller place was an abandoned farmhouse about a mile down the road, long empty and rumored to be haunted by the locals. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "There's something out there. Something that don't belong. Been seeing it for weeks." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Most people around here told stories about the woods, but no one really believed them. Still, late at night, the idea of something watching from the dark was hard to shake. "What kind of something?" I asked, trying not to sound as uneasy as I felt. He looked around the store, like checking if anyone else was listening, then whispered, "A man, or maybe not a man. Stands tall, real thin. No face, just a dark shape." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like a ghost story." He shook his head. "I'm serious. Saw it twice, just standing there near the old barn. Didn't move, just watched. Makes the hairs on your neck stand up." I wanted to tell him it was probably just a trick of the light or a deer, but his face was so serious I didn't argue. "I gotta get going," he said after paying. "But you watch yourself, okay? Don't go near those woods alone." He left, and I locked the door behind him. The rest of my shift went by slow, every creak and groan of the old building setting my nerves on edge. That night, I barely slept. When I finally drifted off, I dreamt of the woods, dark, tangled branches reaching out like fingers. The faceless man stood just beyond the trees, silent and still. 2 nights later, my friend Jake and I decided to test the story. We grabbed some flashlights and headed out to the Miller place, half joking, half curious. The air was thick with humidity, and the night was alive with the sound of cicadas and distant frogs. As we neared the farmhouse, the moonlight casting long shadows, the air grew colder and the silence stretched heavy. We scanned the edges of the barn and the overgrown fields with our flashlights, but found nothing. Then Jake stopped. "Look," he whispered, pointing toward a tree line. There, barely visible in the dark, was a tall, slender figure. No face, just a dark silhouette. Our breaths caught. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. I felt my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give us away. We both froze. Suddenly, the figure vanished like it had never been there. We bolted back to the car, the sounds of the night suddenly rushing in, louder and more real than before. After that, I never went near those woods alone. The faceless man became more than just a story. And sometimes, when I'm lying awake on a summer night, I swear I can feel those unseen eyes watching me, waiting just beyond the edge of the trees. Story the end.